Welcome back to Orange Hat Reviews, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day. Now, we're back to Infinity Saga Sunday. We got the full hat crew plus a guest joining us. And I am hearing myself. Okay, never mind. That's been fixed. So, before we get started, I do want to point out right now, I am not going to discuss anything that happened over the last few days on Twitter. I am not going to talk about any of the drama. It's over. It's done with. We're moving on. So with that out of the way, let's say hello to the chat. So far, we got Vanya. Good to see you. And we got writer C.S. Johnson saying hi to Vanya. So Captain America and the First Avenger. Everybody saw it recently. Everybody got it fresh in their minds.
I got most of it fresh in my mind. At least the key points.
All right. Everybody else?
I watched it last
Ready
night.
to dissect.
It was a lot of fun.
All righty.
Yep.
Now, again, I do also want to remind some of the folks in the chat or anybody who's catching it on the replay, smash the like button, share the stream out. It's always good to have a friendly discussion. Now, we discussed Thor last week. I do want to remind people, this is not going to be a cut down and bash any actors and whatnot. Yes, we are aware that actors are assholes in real life. However, we're discussing the movie to enjoy it and have fun with the discussion.
Yes.
So, just want to make that clear. That's no dig to anybody. I just want to make that clear. I mean, yes, we are all aware that some movies are flawed. We don't like some movies more, or we like some movies more than others. But you know what? We're still going to discuss it peacefully and nicely and have a fun discussion. So, before we get going, Skyhound Pierre is joining us. How you doing?
Doing good, yourself?
Doing good. We got our buddy Ambassador, my co-host. How you been?
Yo, I am well, and I'm here to do it all day.
All right. That's what she said. Right, Kitty, how you doing?
You can't misgender him on stream.
I'm doing good. I'm almost free from college.
Awesome.
This
Yay.
semester.
Nice.
Break those chains, girl. That's what she said. How you doing? We got C.S. Johnson, and how we doing?
I'm good.
All right, and Jacob. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to be back.
All right, Eastland Burkholder in the chat. Good to see you. How you doing?
Hey, there's a name I haven't seen in a while.
Yep. She's always active on my Facebook and whatnot. So,
Miss
Captain
you,
America. Yeah, I'm friends with her. So, Captain America, the First Avenger, Paramount production, and also with Marvel Studios. One of the things I do love about the beginning of this, you have no idea what's going on until they get inside that ship. You're in the Arctic, seeing a beautiful sunrise, or was it sunset? Could never tell which, but still beautiful. And you see that this guy is talking to these two guys. It's like, how come nobody spotted before? The place was this topography is always shifting, and when they crane up with the camera, you see the outline of what we know is the Valkyrie ship that the Red Skull used. But at the beginning of the movie, we don't know what it is for when we saw it the first time. Now, what were your guys' thoughts when you saw the outline? Like, what did you think it could have been before they lasered into the ship with the I'm guessing it was a Stark tool. So we'll start.
Well, when I first saw it, though, for the first time, what occurred to me is that despite not me reading the comics as much and not knowing much in terms of background, despite playing some of the games, back in the day, when I first saw that ship, I thought to myself that, okay, this definitely has some significance as per what the connection is. I'm not entirely sure, but I know they're going to be doing like the whole flashback stuff, like, how it started. And then eventually, as the film goes on, it does kind of like, tie into like, what's been going on as of late. So
Mhm.
it kind of gives me an idea in terms of what am I going in for. I know this kind of has to do with like, how the character started and all, but all questions will be answered in due course.
Mhm. All right, Ambassador, what did you think about the outline with the red light things around the ship? Like, what did you think it could have been?
Well, being as it was Captain America, and we know this movie takes place during World War II, I'm thinking advanced tech aircraft, perhaps from something that was designed by the Nazis during World War II, because we know from records that they were working on jet propulsion and other advanced tech for that time. So figured it might have been something along those lines, because we definitely didn't have anything like that.
Yeah.
But obviously it's set in the MCU, so think something a little more, maybe something a little more developed than what was actually done in real history. So that was my main thought.
All right. Right, Kitty?
Well, because at the time I had already watched the wonderful Marvel that is Michael Bay's Transformers. I was reminded very, very heavily of the first scenes in the first movie. So I thought it was an alien spaceship that's going to have a giant robot in
Hey, at least you're honest.
it.
Seriously.
CS?
Yep.
I really like alternative history stuff, so I was like, oh, okay, cool, yay. Yeah, it's not much to make me happy.
All right. And Jacob?
Well, when I first saw it, I did get really excited. I've read some of the early Captain America stuff, and as well as Captain America Reborn, which was kind of like a reboot that they did of the character. And they retconned it away for some reason, even though it was way better than the other stuff. But anyway, I got really excited because Marvel and DC always does this thing where the Nazis somehow get a hold of some advanced tech. So like in DC, they had the war wheels, right? Where it was these giant wheels that would just roll across the battlefield and like blast lasers and stuff. So my mind immediately went to, oh, this is one of those things. Somehow Hydra by proxy got a hold of something that they're going to use. Because I was pretty much convinced it was going to be Hydra. Hydra is always, that subsector in Captain America lore, if you will. So I knew it was something Hydra. I didn't know what it was, but I was certainly excited to see it, given the history of how they always want to advance the technology of World War II whenever, wherever it is taking place.
All right. And one of the things, I'm like, did they find a giant stealth bomb? That was my initial reaction when I saw it, but then they lasered in, and it turns out to be this big craft. And I absolutely love how it was a nice reveal. They're like, Lieutenant, my God, get me a line to the Colonel. It's 3 a.m. I do not care what time it is. This one's waited long enough, and you see the shield, which is a nice little touch. And then we return to a location that we saw 1,000 years prior in the films, in Thor specifically, Tonsberg, Norway, where there's this guy running into a church, and we see Mr. Filch from Harry Potter talking in Norse, and they're like, they've come for it. Many have before. They'll never find it. And suddenly the wall caves in. You got these Nazis trying to push open a sarcophagus. Not really working. Somebody filing their nails. Sorry, I'm just hearing the scratching noise, and it's like...
Oh, that might be me and my cats in the room.
Okay. Just checking. But anyway, so we then are introduced to Johann Schmidt, who has one hell of a ride. Love that car. I mean, I hate that it was done by Nazis, but I love that car.
Yes.
That's a very nice car.
Yeah, very. And he comes in, Hugo Weaving, man, very good villains, very good hero, or very good anti-hero when he did V for Vendetta.
Yes.
But I gotta say, playing this role as the Red Skull was one of the coolest things I saw when I was when I was watching movies at that time. I mean, this dude just freaking killed it. And
Oh yeah.
I love how he is reasonable, but he's also deceptive with
Mhm.
the caretaker. And he tells him, you can't help me, but I'm sure you can help your village. I mean, pretty sure you have some grandkids or something. I have no need for them to die. And then you see the tank actually target the village. And I'm thinking, well, these are Nazis. I wholly expect them to freaking open fire no matter what happens. You aren't
Mhm.
disappointed because that's exactly what happens right after he gets the Tesseract. And I love how they do the bait and switch. These 4 freaking Nazis are trying to open this damn thing. He goes up, shoves it open like it's nothing. And I'm like, okay, this guy has super strength. Who the heck is he?
Yes.
Because at first I didn't know who he was.
Mhm.
I didn't even see the Captain America trailers at the time until like a month ahead. It's like, okay, then maybe that guy is the Red Skull, but I had no idea he was super strong. I wasn't into comics, folks. I'm sorry.
Same here.
But
this was my first introduction to the Avengers, like the MCU. So
yeah,
something.
and so he lifts up this very, very nice glass cube, and then just shatters it, and you see this wounded look on the Nazi's face. The guy's like, "Oh my god, this dude just broke it." And
But
we then,
obviously, Schmidt though knows that the real one
Yeah.
is still around and it's being hidden. So then
Mhm.
we get to the part where he comes across this relief, this
A
old
big
Norse
Yggdrasil.
relief, and he
Mhm.
mentions about Yggdrasil and Norse mythology a little bit. Manages to solve a little quick puzzle, I think, which then reveals where the real one is.
Yeah. And I really do like how in this movie, because they don't do it in the second movie, or they don't do it in Avengers or any other movie that has a Tesseract in it. This movie, you can hear an auric or kind of like an aura sound of the Tesseract, and it's
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
unearthly, ethereal kind of it. This is something that projects power, even though you're not
Mhm.
directly seeing it. It's really was a great sound effect, and you get that great line, which is a direct call out to Indiana Jones and the Fuhrer digs for trinkets in the
Trinkets
desert.
in the desert.
Mhm.
I absolutely love that line.
I
And
do
then
too.
he ends up giving the order to open fire and shoots the caretaker, and you see the blood on the skull of the Hydra insignia. So you know that this guy's Red Skull. Basically, it's a nice little shout out there. What did you guys think of the opening sequence to the Norway sequence? We'll start with Pierre first.
When I first saw that, though, for the first time, I knew that this character, he was not to be trifled with. And two, eventually, like I would see like how the connection between, Hydra and, what their main purpose was pretty clear in terms of how this, back and forth between Captain America and, this organization would not only define the character, but at the same time, like for those that read the comics, know how this kind of like adds on to a bunch of other rogues galleries that these characters come across. So overall, the introduction itself was really well done, and like what you mentioned before with the sound effect of the Tesseract, when I first heard it, it was really like it pretty much made sense that this is not a normal artifact and that there's something in there. As for what that is, eventually, we'll learn, down the road. But overall, pretty well done.
All right. CS, what did you think of the sound effect of the Tesseract and the Norway sequence?
I thought it was pretty good. Like I I like that how it like glows and it's got that like whole sort of like alien look to it. So it was like a nice setup for the beginning sequence, especially since I was kind of going into the movie pretty cold as to what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. All right, Riot. What did you think of the sound effect in the Norway sequence?
I thought, yeah, this is definitely alien object, and that is definitely the bad guy. So I guess it was effective.
Mm-hmm. Jacob?
I really enjoyed it. One of the things that I thought was cool later on, and we might talk about this later, so I apologize if I'm getting ahead of myself, but when he breaks the fake Tesseract, I felt like it was when they did Avengers Infinity War, when Thanos broke it and the Space Stone was inside of it.
Yeah.
I realized, oh my gosh, that's kind of a callback. So Red Skull Johan, he breaks the fake one, and to find, and then he finds the true one, and then Thanos breaks it to reveal the power that was inside of it. I thought that was a really cool callback later on. As for the scene done here, I thought it was really well done. At the time, I didn't understand the complexities of copyright and trademark law and in regards to film adaptations. So I was a little disappointed when it was actually in Norway, because I was thinking, oh my gosh, they're about to reference Doctor Doom's kingdom. What is it?
Latveria.
I was like, they're about to reference Latveria. Oh my gosh! And then it's just Sweden. I was like, oh, okay. Well, of course, at the time,
Norway.
like I said, Fox, 20th Century Fox had the rights to Fantastic Four, obviously. So Latveria couldn't be in these movies yet. But I have to admit, when I saw it in theaters, that did disappoint me just as a fan. But obviously, I still enjoyed it. Like you were saying, Hugo Weaving, I've seen him in some amazing films as well as in some stinker films, but no matter what he's in, he's one of those actors that just gives his all. Like even if he's in a movie that he knows is not going to turn out well, he always just acts like it no differently. I always say this about Kurt Russell and Helen Mirren. No matter what film they are in, actors like that just give their all. And of course, in this, I really enjoy Captain America: The First Avengers, and I thought he was an amazing choice to play Red Skull. So this sequence, top notch. Getting to see it in theaters was an amazing experience, especially like you were saying, for the first time getting to see the otherworldly nature of the Tesseract, or as the comics call it, the Cosmic Cube. But we'll go with Tesseract for the film's sake.
Now that you mentioned about it, though, Jake, it occurred to me that when you were referencing Thanos a little bit later on, it reminded me, like later on, like in Phase 2 with Ultron, about the whole breaking of the Tesseract and all that. It reminded me of the line that Ultron mentions later, how when the people were only so focused on the surface and never bothered, looking within. I know I'm just paraphrasing here, but you kind of get where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Not just with the Space Stone, but with just the stones in general. Like there's an outer covering that's concealing the power within inside for, a certain reason. And we know it's, otherworldly. We get that. And that's basically kind of like what those films were trying to portray with these stones for the most part.
Come to think of it, you're absolutely right. Every stone had some sort of concealment, shall we say. Ambassador, what were your thoughts on the sound effect of the Tesseract and the Norway sequence?
Honestly, I never even noticed the sound effect until y'all mentioned it. To be perfectly candid, as far as the whole Norway scene goes, it's a very good scene to set up your main villain, and also obviously the main plot line of the movie itself. A couple of things I found interesting. Red Skull's car, the Hydra car, was actually built from the ground up. They actually built that thing lock, stock, and barrel, which I thought was really cool fully functional vehicle, obviously, and obviously the Hydra mega tank that was all CGI. As far as the sequence itself, Hugo Weaving has been, I mean, regardless if it's V for Vendetta, Elrod, Agent Smith, obviously Red Skull here. I mean, he always gives a good performance, even when it's just a voice performance, like when he did the voice for Megatron for the first few Michael Bay Transformers films.
That's true.
He always he always brings it. Everything, as you've all mentioned, everything. If he knows if the movie's not going to be as up to snuff as some of his other work, the guy's there. He's not only just getting a paycheck, but he wants to earn that paycheck, and that's something that you can definitely respect. As far as his duplicitous nature, I think it's a nice touch but he isn't the raving lunatic like we've seen some other villains be in the MCU. Although, granted, there have been some of the villains there have been stronger ones, there have been weaker ones in terms of performance and portrayal. But with Red Skull, he was definitely one of the higher tier. He still is one of the higher tier villains.
Oh yeah.
The only thing that kind of saddens me is the fact that Hugo Weaving didn't reprise his role for Infinity War Endgame, but that's a minor note. But in terms of the overall, I mean, to connect the dots a little bit here. Paramount was the studio that released the Indiana Jones films, so Schmidt making that reference back to Hitler looking for trinkets in the desert was a great callback to another series of films that we all love, and that was, of course, Indiana Jones. So, but yeah, the whole scene in total, it's a good solid opening.
All righty.
I didn't know he voiced Megatron.
Oh yeah.
I think it was like at least the third.
The first 3 movies, and then Frank Welker took it back over.
Yeah,
right.
That I didn't know. I know it was him for the first 2 or 3, but I didn't know Frank Welker took over after that.
Yeah, whenever they rebuilt Megatron as Galvatron in 4, that was actually Frank Welker.
Okay, that I didn't know.
So then we get introduction to Steve trying to get into, and I actually noted or went extensive into this. The guy, this is the actor who is the small, scrawny body Steve Rogers is named Leander Deeney. And they placed quite well, in fact, Chris Evans' face over him. I mean, this was the very first reface, as we all see on Twitter and whatnot.
I didn't actually even notice until like when I was older. I'm like, wait, really? Chris Evans didn't just drop and put on 80 pounds for this movie?
No.
So the funny thing is, now you bring it up, I do recall that since I am into, the behind the scenes stuff and all that I was a little familiar with the concept of body doubles. So it's like you have the actor doing one performance, and then you have your suit actors and your stunt doubles and all that. Though they substitute themselves in for the one giving the vocal performance and all that. So when I was watching this, it was pretty clear from my limited knowledge of how films are done that such a thing is I guess I don't know if I'd say common, but it is arguably well known that you always have somebody standing in for doing certain performances.
I was going to say, not to be the actually guy, but I was going to say I think the first face on it was The Crow, because Brandon Lee died during production, and I think they actually his stunt double actually performed the rest, but they actually got that was actually the first time they did a face swap with technology, I believe. I could be incorrect about that. Just a little bit of film trivia.
Possibly, yeah. And if they did, that would be pretty damn good.
Very interesting.
The first time I saw face swapping in a movie was Adam Sandler's Click. I don't know why I was watching the behind the scenes part of it.
Why were you watching Click? That's a better question.
That's a better question, yeah.
Kate Beckinsale was like one of those actresses at the time that was like, oh, she's in this movie? It would probably be good then. So I felt that way about Nicole Kidman for a while in the 90s, and then Kate Beckinsale, and then like Josh Lucas had a good run, you know. So yeah, okay, that's why I was watching it.
All right. So
Well,
one of the or getting back to Steve, his list of medical problems: asthma, scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, sinusitis, chronic and frequent colds, heart palpitations, easily fatigued, heart trouble, nervous trouble of any sort, household contact with tuberculosis, and parent and sibling with diabetes. And I'm like, how is he even alive, especially in the 1940s? I just really, it's like, oh my God, man, this kid has been through freaking hell, health wise. And we then get the movie sequence and where this punk is bad mouthing the war, and you see all these other adults like really reacting to this guy. There's always one of those assholes at a theater, folks. But when it's wartime and this dude is like, who cares? Just start the cartoon. And when you're hearing about soldiers dying and you have wives there that are worried about their husbands, at least you had a Steve Rogers there that's like, hey, would you shut up? And then we get him getting beat up in the back end, and it's like, or in the back alley, and we get the famous line, I can do this all day. And he actually does take a good swing at the guy, but unfortunately the guy blocks it and knocks his ass down until Bucky saves him and kicks the dude in the nuts as he's running off. We'll start with Ambassador this time. What did you think of the enlistment medical exam and the theater sequence?
Well, before I get into that, I do have a small addendum to what they actually ended up doing with Steve, the scrawny Steve. Chris Evans actually bulked up for the part, but what they actually ended up doing was they did use the stunt double and they did use the face replace for some of it, for the more difficult shots. But what they actually ended up doing was they went in, took the footage, and they shrunk him down digitally.
Oh.
Yeah. It was on the special features for the film. They did use the stunt double for some of the stuff. Everything. The guy you referenced, he did do some of the more difficult shots that they couldn't quite figure out how to do digitally. But the rest of it and everything was all he was CGI'd essentially. Everything for the first third of the movie, at least until the transformation. As far as it's a wonder Mr. Rogers was still alive, considering medicine in the 1940s wasn't advanced enough. He got lucky that he wasn't dead.
Yeah.
And it showed just how much drive he had to try and be a soldier, do his part rather than just stay at home. And it really sets up the arc of his character that we see throughout the film, honestly, throughout his entire journey. As far as the theater scene goes, I mean, the newsreels was a common thing back then. Kind of a shame we don't have them anymore. But at the same time, who wants to see the news in the movies when you go to the movies to escape from all the news?
Very true.
And, the scene in the alley with the bully. Yeah. He grabs the trash can lid, a very proto version of the shield he'll get later on, and he gives the line, "I can do this all day," and Bucky comes in and saves his hide. Where he may very well that bully may have eventually gotten tired and been like, "Screw it, I'm just leaving." So, but. Good setup, good payoff for what we see down the road throughout the rest of the film and throughout the rest of Steve's journey through the Infinity Saga.
All right, Pierre, what did you think?
Overall, I would say that Ambassador pretty much covered all the bases on that. But for the most part, I do agree, medically wise, that there is no way in heck that Steve would have been alive with all of those medical conditions. Plus, considering the fact that, the medicine during the time, it was limited, resources were limited, the knowledge for some of this stuff was limited, and very few people were really capable of understanding what was going on in the human body at the time.
All right.
But overall, with regards to what happened in the theater, I mean, pretty much Ambassador just like I said, covered all the bases, and the way how they did the editing there, it really tricked my eye pretty well. So kudos to the people who worked on that, at least.
Yeah. All right, Kitty, what'd you think?
At the time, I was kind of like, I thought that maybe he was just alive, just a sheer force of will. Almost, because I have heard like of people who did have a lot of sickness and whatever in those time periods, and like did actually grow up. They lived decent lifespans, but just like maybe it's just the sheer force of his will that he's still here with all of these sicknesses and whatnot. And they kind of shown in the alleyway scene as well, because he's getting punched around, but he's still like trying to take a swing, even though he's definitely very fragile, physically. So yeah, just really sets up his character well for who he is, and is one of his positive points.
All right. So yes.
I really like this part of the movie. I think they introduced Steve really well. I didn't notice the like just how maybe disturbingly small his body is at some points, but because like you get wrapped up in the story pretty quickly, because you get like a kid that's like getting beat up and you feel bad. Like so, like in screenwriting, there's this thing called like save the cat, right? And the opposite of it is called beat the dog, and so you get a lot of people on Steve's side right away, and then Bucky coming in too. It's really nice to see that like they're friends, and even though they have like you find out real quick about the medical issues and everything, and this was like the 1930s, right?
40s.
40s.
40
Was it in the 40s?
or 41? No, 42.
Yeah,
1942. He
Okay.
got
Yeah, it was
the
42. Tonsberg. It was 42.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Tonsberg.
Tonsberg was
When I
41.
talk about World War II, I
this
usually
was
start with the
42.
European numbers. So,
Bye.
yeah. So, I don't think this stuff bothered me so much, but I do like. There's another kind of similar book called A Separate Peace, if you've ever been forced to read it for English, where it's set in World War I instead of World War II, where it's about two friends who basically have to live through wartime, and talking about like athleticism and medical stuff that comes up in it. I thought it was a really good parallel because of that. I was like, oh, good. I can talk about this with my lit students and pretend I'm cool. That's really hard to do,
Yeah. And Jake, what did you think of the introduction and theater?
I loved it. It's the lost art of show don't tell, or you know what I mean.
Yes.
It's whenever you have these films nowadays where it's like all the characters do these long exposition dumps, and you're just like, get to the freaking point, and. How Paramount does this with Steve is instead of like they do the list of all his ailments and whatnot, and it completely fooled me. I'm not a doctor, so I was like, oh, okay, yeah, wow, that sucks for him, but I didn't think, oh yeah, this guy should be dead. I didn't think about that at the time, but I really love how it sets him up. Yeah, he's a frail man. But then he also cares, later on he says, I don't like bullies. He stands up and to the bullies in the theater. I really thought that right away set him up that he's the kind of guy you want to be a Captain America, that despite the odds, he's outnumbered and outmuscled, but he's going to fight. And stand up to himself, grab that trash can lid and whatnot. It's I thought that was really cool. I will say, for Bucky's introduction, as much as I admire Sebastian Stan, I hope one day he's Luke Skywalker. But it's I apologize. But as much as I admire,
No, Jake.
I'm
Jake,
sorry.
you're not.
Sorry.
Jake.
It's okay.
I'll start.
Okay.
As much as I admire Sebastian Stan as an actor, and I think he was excellent as the Winter Soldier, I did feel like there was something missing to Bucky being Captain America's protege, like he was in the comic books. I felt like that as much as I like how they made it, where they were more just kind of war brothers, I do think that having that idea that Captain America could kind of tutor the next generation, I felt like that was missing something from that from these stories. That and I think it has effects later on in the MCU, not necessarily negatively, but just differently than I think it could have happened. But that's not to say I like I said, I don't dislike Sebastian Stan. He was great as Winter Soldier, which I know we'll talk more about that when it's time for Winter Soldier. But I will admit, sitting in the theater seeing it for the first time, I was like, whoa, that's Bucky. Why is he so muscly? He's supposed to be a kid, So, but that is a preference thing. I know they were probably riffing off the Ultimate comic books a little bit. I know Bucky is more grown in the Ultimate comic books than he was in the original stories. But I was willing to give it a chance, and quite frankly, I'm glad I did.
Alrighty. So we then get to the future with Howard Stark.
Yes.
And the introduction of Howard Stark, and with the flying car or the hovering car, and I'm thinking to myself, this thing is not going to work. It's not going to work because, I mean, fucking 41 or 42, really? This thing's not going to work. And it
42.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And I love how he goes on stage and just immediately kisses one of the display women. And it's like, well, that Howard Stark and Tony Stark freaking cut from the same tree, man.
Well, for all we know, that could have been Maria.
Possibly, you never know. And so then we see that Steve, or the woman that he's double dating with, wants nothing to do with him. He offers her Cracker Jacks and whatnot, and he's like, all right, fuck you then. And so he tries to go to enlist again. And I love during this scene when he's having it out with Bucky a little bit, you actually see Stanley Tucci, Abraham Erskine come out and walk, and then they cut to him, but you actually do see him in the wider shot coming out and that is something that this movie paid good attention to. And I really do like how he turns right around after Steve goes in. It's like, okay, this guy has an importance. It's a really good visual way of showing that this person is somehow important. So we got a message from Skyhound here. Here's a fun geek fact I rediscovered later on about the Stark Expo. There's a reference to the first superhero Human Torch for a brief few seconds. That is interesting. I must have missed it.
Oh, yeah. I noticed the first time I watched it.
But,
yeah, I didn't put two and two together that it was the first Human Torch, but later I realized it. Yeah, that's really cool.
Well, I'll bring it up when I get my chance to
speak. So. And we then have Erskine interrupt Steve as he's pretty much getting ready to run. And I love how an MP comes in there to stop him, because Erskine probably understood that this guy was going to run scared. So he's like, just go in there. Don't scare him. Keep him there. And the discussion between Erskine and Rogers, where it's like, so you want to go overseas, kill some Nazis? Excuse me? And I also do love, he's like, is this a test? Yes. He's just outward blunt about it. And that is one of the coolest, or it's just one of the more disarming things about the dialogue. It's like, he actually just admitted this is a test. And that's just unheard of in my there, or in my opinion, and whatnot. And it's like, well, then there you go. You just gave him a chance to fix his answer. But I do like Steve's answer. I don't want to kill anybody. I just don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from. And covering how he's like, where are you from, Mr. Rogers? Is it New Haven, Paramus, and whatnot? So what did you all think of the Stark intro and the approval to enlist due to Erskine? And we'll start with Ambassador.
Okay. As it wasn't actually the Stark Expo, it was the I think it was the World's Fair or something,
Yep.
perhaps. The interesting thing to kind of jump off of Skyhound's comment here, the reference is to Phineas Horton and the Synthetic Man. Here's the interesting thing about the Synthetic Man. Once he's exposed to oxygen, he becomes and he catches on fire, which essentially does make him the first Human Torch. And I do love the fact that they do put that little Easter egg for us hardcore comic book geeks and everything, especially those that read the Marvels back in the 90s, the Marvel storyline. It's like a real world alternate history, which, as you mentioned, CS, you love. Of the Marvel universe set in a real world setting. As far as Dominic Cooper as a young Howard Stark, could have got better casting, and I could be mistaken. That may have not been Maria, but at the same time, if it was, that'd be a nice little callback. The fact that Maria was actually one of his quote unquote show girls or demo girls, whichever way or whatever way you want to categorize it. The other thing I want to comment on is the fact Stanley Tucci as Abraham Erskine. Another great casting. I mean, Stanley Tucci, he's done some great stuff in his career. I mean, obviously this role here, he was great in the Hunger Games movies as the announcer Caesar. I think was the character's name. But the questioning between him and Steve, I'm kind of the same mindset. I don't like bullies. I don't want to kill anybody, but I can't stand a bully, and I will kick a bully's ass if I'm pushed to it. And Erskine's like, okay, you get to go and at least get your shot. You get your chance. So anyway, that's my thoughts on that scene.
All right, Riot Kitty. Intro to Howard and being allowed to enlist. What'd you think?
Well, with Howard Stark, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. And if that was Maria, then that makes too much sense. So yeah, with like the military and being allowed to enlist, I'm just like, how? How the heck is he able to enlist? It's just kind of like, it seems like it just, at least to me, it's Green, whatever his name is, he seemed to come off like it's just like, it almost feels like it's a whim for him. Like he just wants to see where this goes and he's amused.
Yeah.
at the idea of this scrawny kid joining the military. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
All right, CS.
I really liked the doctor character in this. Maybe it's because I like doctor characters for some reason. So, yeah, ask my husband about that one. I thought I like that. I like that he talked about like it's not just like what you look like, and it's not about like physicality. I mean, like we kind of saw this with Hulk, where it really does matter if somebody's going to like mess with your system. You should be able to be centered and grounded enough to remain stable to the transformation process, even if there are severe or tragic consequences. And I think Stanley Tucci has definitely got some really weird, um, like roles in his life for what it's worth. So like my kids are watching Beethoven, and he's like one of the bad guys in it. It's hilarious.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
so that's
remember.
from
Yeah.
like
Which
so
movie were
yes,
you watching?
Beethoven, like with the
Oh,
big red or the big big
yeah, the
Saint
Saint Bernard.
Bernard dog. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I do not let them watch anything new.
Yeah.
We watched movies that I grew up on, and I remember being traumatized at this one. So I was like, okay, we'll watch
I love that
Beethoven.
movie.
All right.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, he's like one of the bad guys in that. So coming from that and then seeing him in this, it's like, oh, it's like I feel like I've grown up with you. And the other role that I know he's like really well known for is the Devil Wears Prada guy. So opposite Meryl Streep in that one. And he has such a good range on it, and there's such sincerity with him that I
Mhm.
think it really
Mhm.
works. That's one thing I think the Marvel, stuff has really gotten a problem with is that they can't take anything seriously now because it's all kind of tongue in cheek and wink wink at the camera, and it's
Indeed.
people like snarkiness, but at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily mean anything of substance if you have no substance to go off of. So, um, so while the writers are striking, if you need a scab, I know the person.
Yeah.
um, but I really liked how he was talking about it's not just like I said, the physical part of the person; it's the mental, emotional, willful sort of well-being and the moral rightness. One of the things that I really hate about people today is that they say one person's patriot is another person's terrorist, and it's like that's not true because the patriot defends while the terrorist destroys. And it's like, yeah, there's some degree of probably both and, but it's not going to be a straight comparison. And Erskine is looking at somebody who will step up and fight and will fight for good, not just somebody that wants to step up and fight. So
Yeah.
good philosophical undergirding. Yay.
All right.
As far as Howard Stark goes, I kind of laughed at his introduction too, because, like Tony has to be better than him. We already kind of know that Tony's going to be bigger and better in terms of the tech and presentation. There's like such a, almost like a really irritating sort of perfectionism about Tony when it comes to his work.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of nice to see Howard. Howard makes up for that with like charm and charisma. And it's not to say Tony doesn't have that, but he has to more or less, he has to lean more into that. And I think that's a good kind of starting off, especially since he's younger still. Like I know there's scenes in Iron Man 2 where the little movie part comes up and you see that he's aged and he's matured and he's kind of leveled out a little bit more. So this is a pretty good introduction to him. You can kind of see his life's character arc in between those two, and they make sense. Okay, if you want to see characters where their life just doesn't make any total sense, that's where I leave you with The Last Jedi, right? So
Yeah.
Jake,
if Jake's gonna get banned, I'll follow him.
There's for me with Dominic Cooper, I really thought he was great as Howard, as a young Howard, I should say. He really captured the character. It was so funny because I read reviews of the film when and specifically about that, and they kept comparing him to Howard Hughes, and I was like, does anyone? Because anytime there's an eccentric rich guy, they've got to compare him to Howard Hughes. And I'm like, but this in particular didn't make any sense to me because Howard Hughes really wasn't like he was eccentric, but he wasn't really flamboyant. He avoided the public spotlight, and I'm like, here's Howard Stark right in the middle of it, dancing and kissing women on stage. To me, that just showed he was the exact opposite of Howard Hughes. He's out there, even though he does all the secret work for the government, he's still in the public eye. He maintains that relationship with the public. He builds it up. I thought he was good. I was actually hoping after, Robert Downey's time as Tony would end, we would get word that they were going to bring Dominic back as either Gregory or Anton, and depending on the writer, he's either Stark's brother or cousin who's just as smart but lacks the ethics of Tony in some degree. So I was hoping that they would bring him back in that capacity. That way we could have some sort of Iron Man. And of course, Disney doesn't think about these things, but I really enjoy his character. I think he did a good job. The conversation between Steve and Emil was essential because he was chosen. And it's really interesting. Someone was it you, Ambassador, or was it Orange? Did one of you pointed out that you see him in the background in the wide shot? So right away he knows that Steve is something special, and I really appreciated that attention to detail that Joe Johnston took as the director. I always love it when the directors go this route where and they get that close where they want you to see how personal and how important these scenes are, where we know right away what kind of man Steve Rogers is and what kind of man Emil is. It's that really great connection of hearts and minds.
You keep calling him Abraham or Emil.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Abraham, Stanley Tucci's character. My bad. Yes, okay. I don't know. I keep thinking Emil. I was probably thinking of a different character, but yeah, sorry, Abraham. Thank you. Yeah, that was a really great. Just that was a really great scene. Or both of those scenes were really excellent. I really enjoyed how they brought it together to show where the story was going and where it was headed.
All right, and a great parallel. We jump to the other faction who are making their own preparations, where we get introduced to Toby Jones's Dr. Arnim Zola and Schmidt, which are testing the Tesseract, and they stabilize at 70%. Now, I point this out, the 70, because 70 happens to come in to play later on in this film in two other manners. Now, they're creating new weapons for Hydra, and I do like how it gives off the ethereal sound channeling and then also crosses the room as they're pushing the boundary to get the energy transfer. You see that the Tesseract is kind of it's almost like it's pissed off that it and starts to expand its own aura across the room as they're pushing the energy stabilization, where he asks, what was that? Almost as if the Tesseract was protesting being used in such a manner.
It's like a cat at the vet.
Pretty much, yeah. And so what did you guys think of this, especially with the scene where he's like calibrating and his face is right in the middle of the camera thing, which is actually a direct call out to Arnim Zola's character, which is a robot with a big old face in the chest. So we'll start with Jake this time. What did you think of the Arnim Zola and Schmidt sequence?
Toby Jones was a perfect choice for Arnim Zola. He did such an amazing job. I also think it's we were talking about callbacks when he said what was that and whatnot. There's in Infinity War when Thanos and Gamora find the Red Skull there for the Soul Stone. He makes this comment that the stone, I once sought the stones and then they cast me out, right? And as you pointed out, it's almost like it's angry the way it's going, all that really awesome special effects that they do. And I love this scene because that seems like it's preparing you for that. Now, I don't think Paramount was thinking that far ahead. More than likely, the writers of Infinity War was like, hey, maybe we could do something with that, right? But I really appreciated that, and this is going to be referenced at the end of the film, which I know we'll talk about that later, but just like you said, it's almost like it's not just a power source. It's not just a cosmic cube. It is something that they don't fully understand, something that that sure they can channel it, but can they really control it? And it's giving you that impression in a very subtle way, and I really appreciated it about that scene.
All right, Riot Kitty.
Well, honestly, I was definitely a little wigged out. For me, like the first Avenger, it has quite a few elements of like a monster movie or something like that. You know, it's like, oh, you go to like a isolated, weird craft in the middle of nowhere. And then like this one, it's like the Tesseract. It's like you're trying to channel an energy source, and then it seems like it's alive in some capacity. So yeah, and honestly, I did like this Aram Zola. That I actually like his performance a lot. So he was very well. He wasn't like the big bad. Like his performance was very distinct. It's like a henchman kind of character. So he's really memorable to me. Even before watching the movie again, like I was just like, yeah, I remember that guy.
Alrighty. Ambassador.
This literally just came to my mind. Because you have a very diminutive individual in person of Toby Jones playing Arnim Zola. And you have Hugo Weaving as the Red Skull, Johann Schmidt. It's almost like they flip-flop things in terms of characters, because think about it. Bucky was very scrawny, kind of puny, not as old necessarily as Arnim is, but maybe they did that unintentionally. They flip-flop things for a distinct visualistic, whereas you have Bucky and Steve, who, while they're also at the beginning, one's very muscular, the other one's kind of puny, but then once they go through the transformation, Bucky and Steve are both on the same footing. Just Steve's got all the extra ability that Bucky doesn't, but Bucky's still a capable soldier just on his own merits. As far as them trying to toy or tamper with the Tesseract, the thing we have to remember, and we'll get to this when we get to Guardians Volume 1, with the Collector's monologue about the Infinity Stones. These were created by cosmic entities. So in essence, each of the Infinity Stones could have a sentience of their own to varying degrees. And the thing you have to remember, the Tesseract is not a power source. It's a means by which to travel through time and space, or at least through space. And it just requires a strong enough will to do so. As far as the scene itself goes, it's a nice setup for what they're trying to do to the Tesseract. The flashes of space being shown above them, which will be later more amplified at the end or anything during the fight between Red Skull and Steve on the Valkyrie. The Tesseract doesn't like what's being done to it, but at the same time, another person's will is being enacted upon it, and it, to a degree, relents.
All right.
Now that I think about it, I wonder, okay, with like the context of like what the purpose of the Infinity Stones were like made for, right? I'm wondering if it maybe was kind of reacting negatively, like not in a sense that it's like, alive with its own personality and thoughts, but kind of like it's almost like a programmable device, and then it's just lashing out because what the Nazis were trying to use it for was not what it was made for.
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
Assessment.
It's like trying to put like a fork in a socket or something.
Because the Tesseract is a space stone. It controls elements of space to move between things. It's not. It was never
To
meant to
move
be.
between points.
Yeah, it was never meant to be an energy or a destructive energy force.
Yeah, so it's just like
Or
maybe
energy
it's
source
just
of any kind.
yeah, maybe it's just
Sorry,
a
Riot.
reaction because it's like not being used for what it was created for, like that extra context. So
Yeah. And is CS back in the house?
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay. So, what did you think of the Arnim Zola and Red Skull using the Tesseract for weaponry?
I mean, it's kind of natural. I mean, especially like in times of warfare, you do tend to use all the resources at your disposal. And, the Germans have a really strong history of weaponry development. I mean, like just a lot of our modern day technology you can trace it back to its like origins and its designs and its ideas from World War I and World War II. So the idea that they would use like this powerful objects that they're not really sure what will do, maybe, or we'll take the space stone and try to use it in a particular way. I'm not sure if like how well versed they are, I guess, in the exact power in the nature of its characteristics or anything, but I mean, like, you figure it's not hard for like evil guy to use evil thing or to use powerful thing for evil purpose.
Yeah. Alrighty, so we then are introduced to Agent Carter and Colonel Phillips, played by the legendary Tommy Lee Jones, and the basic. Yeah, and I do love her introduction where Gilmore Hodges being a jackass and knocks him on his ass. And Phillips is like, get your ass out of that mud and stand at attention until somebody tells you what to do. And his reaction when he's like, because we are going to have the best men, looking at Steve and then looks at Erskine, and Erskine's like, and they're going to get better. So we see the basic training and how Rogers gets gets a flag where everybody else doesn't because he's smart about it. And Philip's disdain of Rogers, he's like, you don't win wars with niceties, Doctor. You win wars with guts. And then he tosses in a dummy grenade and yells out grenade. Everybody runs except for Steve, who jumps on the grenade. Great moment there. And he's like, is this a test? He's still skinny. I just love that. He's still skinny. So then the whole basic training sequence was great because it also shows that Roger's climbing the net, his asthma acts up because he starts wheezing on the net. And the basic trainer is just always yelling at him, Rogers! And it's really is great, man. So what did you all think of basic training and the introduction to Phillips and Carter, played by Haley Atwell? We'll start with the ladies first. We'll start with CS first this time.
Okay. I like Haley Atwell in this role. I think she really owns it. I mean, I know people like kind of get up in arms sometimes about women and show of power and stuff like that, but I mean, she's in the army. She, Britain's been at war longer than the United States, and she's in a position where she's earned her keep, to be here and everything, and but she's still very feminine, and she's still very like, she can work with men, but she's definitely not a man. So she's not trying to be one of the boys. She has her place, and she makes it her own, and she makes it really I'm trying to think of like a word that means like beautiful in the sense that it's like elegant.
Yeah, elegant. There you go.
Yeah. Like, I think part of I think a lot of the stuff today, like when with feminine characters, I would call her a feminine character. It's just we want them to be the unstoppable girl boss fighter warrior people, and that's fine. But you have to show that they've earned it. That she's not a Mary Sue. She's not here for some diplomatic reason. And like I said, her kind of opening thing to assert her authority and her experience, she plays it off really well. And but at the same time, she's still capable of kind of gentling down everybody else on some level, but not in a bad way. More like it's kind of mirrored, I think, in Steve doing the flag, where it's a way of dealing with people to get what you want. That's not assertive or forceful. It's more like coaxing and intellectually, deft.
That's a good way of thinking about it. Right. What did you think of basic training and introduction to Carter and Colonel Phillips?
Well, I think it just built on Steve's character having just a very strong will as in earlier in the movie. It's just he's still doing this. He's trying his best. He's trying his best, and then he just jumps on a grenade without hesitation, which actually shows that he would pretty much sacrifice himself if it meant that everyone else got out alive. So and that definitely ties into the finale of the movie, which obviously we'll get to later. And then as for Peggy Carter, I kind of miss when strong females were actually strong females, and it's not she's making you have to make the men idiots to make her look stronger. No, Peggy's strong on her own. With or without the male characters or whatever. So, and she's obviously stern and strict, but she's definitely not mean. She's not in unlikable sense. So yeah, those are my thoughts on it.
All right, Ambassador.
Well, you can never, ever go wrong with Tommy Lee Jones. And I honestly kind of wish he had done more comic book movies. Granted, yes, the Men in Black movies are based on comic book, but I'm thinking more superhero-ish. But him as Colonel Phillips, two of his best lines, he's still skinny and he's making me cry. I love those two lines. He's making me cry.
Yeah.
As far as Haley Atwell as Sharon Carter, or not Sharon Carter, Peggy Carter, excuse me. Sharon Carter is the other one. There's an interesting dichotomy here, because you have a British military officer, a female British military officer, which you can see that the British are more open to having a female officer than in the United States military, because to the best of my knowledge, there were none. There were no ranked officers or anything in the United States military during World War II. You had nurses, you had secretaries, that was it. So it shows a little more forward thinking on the part of the British. But you have her come in here, and she brings a lot to her position. She brings experience, because obviously Britain, as I think CS or Riot mentioned, has been in the war a lot longer than the US has. And she brings, as I mentioned, elegance, but she also brings class, but she also brings a bit of tact, which Phillips doesn't really have. But he's a more old school officer, which there's an interesting dynamic there between Carter and Phillips. As far as Stephen getting the flag and getting the ride back home getting right back to the base with Peggy, that just shows that, well, he does have the brawn, he has the brains, and I think that's what makes him a little more appealing to Peggy than Mr. Hodge or anything who's just the muscle head. Not that you can't use a muscle head, but you have to have brawn and brains to win a fight. And we'll see. We'll get the brawn here in a little bit. Those are my basic thoughts on the basic training sequence.
All right, and Jake.
Everyone covered Peggy Carter very well, so I'll just say Haley Atwell is a fantastic actress. She was very well cast in the role. As for the training montage, it's definitely solidified to me what kind of man Steve is, where he's going, how heroic he's going to be. And everyone has said this, but it just bears repeating. Tommy Lee Jones is fantastic in these kind of roles. It kind of reminded me of how he portrayed the U.S. Marshals in U.S. Marshal, and which was a sequel to the Harrison Ford film. Why am I blanking on this? The Fugitive. Yeah, The Fugitive. Thank you. To me, it was more reflective of U.S. Marshals. By then that character had been more mature, had been through this whole ordeal with The Fugitive. And, for me, seeing him in this kind of role, he just wins every time. I think that he did such a fantastic job with it and really showed, to me, he was a good display of sort of that American grit, but also sometimes American stubbornness. And I think that he playing off that well with Peggy Carter, with Steve, and with Abraham, I think that it really worked out that well and connected very well for the sequence.
Okay, and then we get to the talk between Erskine and Stephen about why he was chosen, and a little bit of background on Erskine, how he was chosen by Hitler, and he wanted nothing to do with it, but he was forced into the work because that's what Hitler did with the scientists. And Schmidt took the formula when it wasn't ready, and it had unforeseen consequences. And I do like how they showed the cutting between Schmidt and Erskine talking and arguing, and how he just pulls the gun on him and then forces the formula to be taken. And then we get to the next day, where we get before we get that, actually, no, there's the promise to be a good man. And then we get to the Red Skull portrait, which is a nice little bit between Toby Jones and Schmidt. Sorry if I'm pausing, folks. I'm having a bit of an attack right now with my kidney stone. So, what did you guys think of these two scenes here between Erskine and Steve, and then Red Skull and Zola? There seems to be a parallel that when there is between Steve and Zola, or Steve and Erskine, they also jump to the next theme, which would be Schmidt and Zola. So let's hear you guys' thoughts on that. We'll start with the ambassador.
Actually, let Jake go first.
All right, Jake can go first.
This scene was very well acted for both Chris Evans and with Stanley Tucci. I appreciated the sort of callback to that really cheesy 80s Captain America movie. There's whenever Schmidt takes the formula, they have sort of this almost psychedelic background as he's changing. And I always thought that, where there's a lot of motion and stuff, I always thought that was kind of, maybe it wasn't, maybe they didn't intend it to me, but I always thought that I believe in that one, Red Skull wasn't created by the Nazis. He was actually created by Benito Mussolini in fascist Italy. But I always thought that was kind of interesting how they connected that a little bit. And like I said, maybe it was accidental, but I certainly thought, that kind of psychedelic background reminds me of that same sequence. But yeah, I thought it was very well acted. To me, it explained why it took so long for Abraham to find a candidate for this program, why he waited for so long, why he took his time with going through recruits, why he didn't want to go the route of the colonel, or maybe even the route that Peggy Carter wanted to go, that he knew the exact kind of man he was looking for. And as you noted, it was very well mirrored in the scene coming with Red Skull and Arnim Zola, where you kind of have that reverse, kind of have a reverse of that conversation. So yeah, I thought very well done. It definitely shows the range of acting skills that both Evans and Tucci have, as well as in the next scene with Jones and with Weaving.
Can I just say too, like the acting stuff here is nicely done because I think there's a lot less CGI than there is in like recent Marvel movies.
You got a good point there.
Well,
Like it
and
feels
if I-
more real, and there's like a lot more grit and depth to like the way that you like see the lighting on things.
Well, I'll go ahead and give my thoughts here. The thing you have to remember is the CGI was minimal for this movie. Obviously, they had to do the CGI for Steve early on. They did do some limited CGI for Red Skull after his face reveal, when he rips his mask off in front of Steve, in particular, in that brief scene and everything, where the artist is doing the portrait of Schmidt, of Red Skull. CGI is useful, but also it can become rather jarring when it's oversaturated in a film. Dealing with a past time period like the 1940s, World War II, 1940s, in an alternate universe per se, obviously not the real world. They tried to do as much practical as they could for this film, and the rest they had to do CGI for. But I think what gives this movie its added grit is the time period, but also the story that's being told. This is a very character driven story rather than a plot driven story. Going after a MacGuffin or something, and you get a good, to kind of focus in on those two particular scenes between between Abraham Erskine and Steve Rogers, and given the flashback on the origin of Schmidt becoming the Red Skull. Erskine knew the type of person that Johann Schmidt was, but he was press ganged, as Orange mentioned, into working for the Nazis. And he didn't want to go that route. He didn't want to do it, but he didn't have a choice. I do want to comment on one thing. Back when Erskine is first interviewing Rogers, and he mentions that he is German, and he asks Rogers, "Does this bother you?" And Steve's like, "No." Because you have to remember, which from the 1930s or even the early 1900s, especially into the 1930s and 1940s, even though the United States was not involved in World War II on the official level, we were supplying weapons to Great Britain. There was a lot of anti-German sentiment in the U.S. So for someone like Erskine to be out and about the way he was, it could have been troublesome for him. But Steve judged him on his character, not on where he was from. And just real quick, the sequence between Zola and Schmidt when they're doing the portrait, it's a very interesting scene because we get that very brief reveal, and then Schmidt brings up the lights and shows him exactly what he looks like, just not the portrait itself. And he's like, "What do you think?" He's like, "It's rather striking." one little thing I'll make comment on the piece of music that's being played and everything while the portrait's being made was actually used in one of my favorite cult films from the 1980s, and that was, of course, Excalibur. I love that particular piece of music. I think it was very fitting for this, and I think it really echoes Schmidt's mentality. So, but there we go.
Okay, CS, do you want to give any further thoughts on your side?
Well, I like how Ambassador brought up the fact that it's more of a character-driven story. That's the other like kind of thing that's really kind of gone off a lot of Marvel movies too. Is it's not like there's no MacGuffin and there's no this is the thing that we need to like make this thing happen type of stuff. It does kind of start off as more of a plot-driven story because of the Tesseract introduction, but ultimately at the heart of it is like it is like, will Steve Rogers save the day? You know, get the performance enhancing drug serum and stop the bad guys and save the day, get the girl. And those are all very good questions to ask when you're writing stories.
Yes.
Yep. And in kind of setting up your antagonist and your protagonist, and here, you know, Zola acts as kind of like Erskine's foil, where he's this mirror image of like a mad scientist who's eager to bring out the destruction of the world in order to start a new one. So I thought they did really well, kind of like setting this kind of dynamic up.
All right, and Riot?
Well, yeah, it really is a character-driven story, and I do know that like it's with a lot of wars in history, right? You know, whoever's on the opposing side, you know, you'll get a lot of animosity, like a bit of like just general paranoia or negative sentiments, and so the fact that you know Steve you know wasn't really bothered by Eskin being German, you know, it just kind of probably, I'm gonna be honest, probably really meant something to the guy, even if like he just seems like he's just like I signed this boy up for my amusement, but you know, it just kind of shows like strong moral character of Steve Rogers in that regard. So I like that. And with the portrait stuff, it was again, I feel like this movie is like kind of like a quarter horror. So that was really scary to me. My mom and I were like, "Oh my God, like cover my eyes, please." It's just like, no, it's just like, oh, this is really weird. I don't like it at all. So,
Alrighty,
Yeah.
and Jacob.
I already gave my thoughts on this scene.
Yeah, Orange, he went first.
Right, sorry. Alrighty, so we get to the procedure and the nice little talk between Peggy and Steve in the car. And I love it. It's like, I've been here before. I got beat up in that in that alleyway and behind that diner in that parking lot. And he explains further, it's like, did you have a problem with running away? Well, once you start running, they'll never let you stop. And we then get into the procedure, and Richard Armitage, who plays Thorin in the Hobbit movies, plays Fred Clemson, who is a Nazi spy, or Hydra spy, rather. Well, they're both Nazis. And we get the procedure where, I will say this on the previous scene between Erskine and Steve, where they're about to have some schnapps, and he stops Steve. He's like, "Oh, no, wait, what am I doing? You have procedure tomorrow. No fluids." Well, all right, we'll drink it after. No, I don't have procedure tomorrow. I'll drink it after. I drink it now. Which was a nice and sweet little funny moment. And so the procedure gets up to 70%, and that's when Steve starts screaming. And then we hear him yell, "No, "Oh, I can do this. Just keep it going." And we get the beautiful theme of Captain America as they open up the test tube or sarcophagus or whatever you want to call it. And I really do love the Captain America theme. I think it was Alan Silvestri who does the music for this movie.
Yeah.
And he just really had a great way of doing an American patriotic horn, using the horns a lot in the orchestra in order to sell the kind of military feel for it, and the light percussion as well. So, what did you all think of the talk with Peggy as well as the procedure? We'll start with the ladies first and then go to the guys in any order. I'll be right back.
Well, I guess I'll go first. Well, it's just kind of like one of those really like epic moments in the early MCU. You know, it's just like, duh, and then here he is. There's Captain America. So, yeah, that was kind of a bit of a worrisome scene as well, because you're like, is he gonna die or whatever? But yeah, it's just very iconic, you know. It's in the music score obviously sold that scene very well. So you guys can go next, I guess. So
Yeah. CS, you're up.
if she's
I
there,
think, I think you're muted, CJ.
Yep,
See,
I
yes, you're
was muted. Thank you. Okay. Yes, I was saying I wanted to make sure she was done. Yeah, I really like Steve and Peggy's interactions for what it's worth. I'm a romantic at heart, if you haven't guessed. I really
We
like
all are to a degree.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I know life, like real life, does tend to make people more cynical, but you know, so like just her her support of him and everything is kind of like almost reminiscent of Steve looking past Erskine being German, or like not letting it affect him. Like she doesn't look at him and see like this puny guy. I mean, like he is, but I mean, like she doesn't deride him for that, because what's on the inside and what she's seen of his work and his dedication so far. And I think the scene where he gets the serum injected and it's really just kind of, it is supposed to be like a big moment, so a nice big beats and everything. I feel bad on some level, because I think I said last time, like I don't pay attention to the music too much unless it's really, really off. You just kind of just get swept up along into it, and it's really nice to have that kind of flow. So, yeah. Oh, Skyhound's talking with us too.
Yeah. He's still in the chat. I'm glad to have him
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. I think it's kind of sweet, and it's like you know, like I don't think any men in general feel like they're good enough for the women that they love and admire to pay attention to them. Like if it's because like real love comes from a place of humility, you know. So all the alpha male Andrew Tate stuff is kind of weird. In more than one way, but the fact that he's
go ahead, CS. Sorry, I'll say.
Oh no, go ahead. Well, we're supposed to have like a discussion too, so like if you feel like you want to interrupt me, you're welcome to. So
I don't
take it personally.
Frankly, Andrew Tate is a caricature of what he thinks a real man is. He is by no means a real man. He is a blowhard who made a semi-name for himself as a kickboxer and as a wannabe podcaster. I'm sorry. He is, to use the nice Yiddish word, a schmuck.
Yeah, he's kind of like He would be more similar probably to the other soldier guy, right? So
Cameron Hodge. Yep.
yes. So Steve and Peggy talking here is very sweet, and I like it. It's nice, softer moments. I mean, they're going to war and stuff, so it's kind of a good juxtaposition between that kind of
Just a balancing of the light and the darkness, or
right.
whatever.
Mm-hmm. Makes you pay attention.
Yes. Jake, did you want to go first?
Sure. This sequence is fantastic. As Skyhound said in the chat, that it's pretty relatable, the conversation between Steve and Peggy, and I agree with that. I grew up very. I was very timid as a child. I know that's hard to believe now. Anyone who knows this, they're like, "Whoa, wait a minute! You were a nervous, timid kid," and I was like, "Yes." And when I got older, I did sports, and that really helped build my confidence, which is why I'm a big promoter. I tell people, do sports. It'll find a sport that you can do. You'll love it. And then it'll build your confidence. And that's one of the things that really helped me grow. Of course, in Steve's case, it's a super soldier serum, but say that 5 times very fast. But I really found this very relatable. I was very easily intimidated, and I had to grow and mature and learn how to deal with my bullies. And I learned very early on, if you run, they're never going to stop chasing you, just as Steve says. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, obviously, but I really enjoyed it. I thought the moment where he goes in the machine, it was very cool. It was like Orange Hat pointed out, the music playing is just fantastic. It's very well made. It's very well done. It's kind of funny because this scene is shown in Spider-Man, the animated series in the 90s, which I was a frequent watcher, whether it was brand new or the myriad of reruns that Fox Kids would play. I watched the heck out of that show. And they have a whole arc where it has to do with Captain America. And they show this scene recreated in animation form. And I really, I have to admit, part of me, even as an adult at this point, was going, will this scene live up to the 90s Spider-Man? And of course it did. It exceeded my expectations, I can honestly say. So that was really funny that I had that little kid me in the back of my head saying, this may not live up to your expectations, but it did. And more so, it blew my expectations out of the water. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done. It really shows the pain and the emotion of what is happening in the moment. So yeah, there it is.
My take on the lead up to the procedure and the procedure itself. The car ride with Steve and Peggy, you can tell there's some chemistry between the two of them. Yeah, they are physically very dissimilar, particularly Steve at this point. But we've all had, whether it's male or female, we've always had that one guy or gal that we always want to take a shot at. And Steve is still not quite there. But the funny thing with Peggy is her talking with him. She says to him, "You've really never talked to a woman, have you?" And he's like, most women don't want a guy that they could potentially step on. And I do love that. I love that line because there's some truth in it. More superficial women would not give Steve a second look. Peggy, while she is very attractive, she's not shallow. She's not antagonistic, and she doesn't ever emasculate Steve or any other guy in this movie. She doesn't even emasculate the one guy, Hodge, even though he's being a complete and total ass.
Oh, she did knock him on his ass.
She did knock him on his ass, but we can see, obviously she was trained and everything as an officer, and officers would receive combat training. So that whole exchange between the two of them, it's building more chemistry between the two of them, and it's also building towards the payoff at the end. But once they get to the shop, and I do love that whole sequence where the shopkeeper comes out and she's like, "Lovely weather we're having," and Peggy's like, "Yeah, but I always carry an umbrella." And the shopkeeper goes behind the desk, and you see the button to let him in, but she also see the Thompson submachine gun, and I do love that. Anything very period accurate, appropriate firearm for the time for the 1940s. As far as the whole sequence itself goes, you've got the one Senator Brandt, I think was his name, and Colonel Phillips, and he's like, why the hell am I in I think it's Hoboken or something, or in Brooklyn, because it's in New York, it's not in New Jersey. And Phillips is like, well, I kept saying your requisitions and you kept shooting them down, so he's like, we're here now, deal with it. And I do love that fact that even though it's a senator that the colonel is speaking to, he doesn't speak to him like a superior. He's kind of speaking to him like, I'm a soldier, you're a politician, go pound sand. And I don't think anybody but Tommy Lee Jones playing Colonel Phillips could have gotten away with doing that, honestly. As far as the procedure itself, it's portrayed very well. I mean, Dominic Cooper as Stark, him operating the machinery and everything, and the design of the machinery, it's again that heightened technology, heightened technology that could have existed at that time period, but designed to look like it would exist in that time period. That's one key thing that I love that they did with this movie. They didn't make it look so far-fetched that it would be unbelievable for the time period. It looks like it's advanced, but it's advanced for that time. And Steve goes through the procedure. I know we'll get to the aftermath of it here in just a minute, but he comes out and he's Captain America now, or will be Captain America in a few scenes.
Did anyone else think that he looked rather doughy when he came out of the pod?
That's because he was sweaty, I guess. That's
Yeah,
what I
I'm pretty sure
attributed it
Doughy
to.
is not
UNCS
the
didn't
word
have
that
a
came
problem with
to
that. Yeah, that was a joke.
Thanks.
But anyway,
Boom.
it was definitely for the ladies, that shot. I mean, even Peggy couldn't help herself but touch him. But then we see Clemson set off his lighter, trigger a bomb that was up in the booth, and Erskine is shot, and the formula taken, and we get the chase. Now, I gotta say, Peggy is a really good shot.
Yes,
I
she
mean,
is.
that is one of the things they did very well with her. She's British intelligence, so she's definitely going to have some skills. And then we get the chase through New York. And I love how Steve, actually not used to his body yet, runs into a window and then continues on the chase into the pier, or to the pier. And he picks up the door to the cab, which, funnily enough, has a star on it. Now, one of the things that I did notice, which was a small inconsistency, was that he did get shot, because he reacts when the second shot hits the door. He goes, ah, and he's also holding his side a little bit. But they also have incontinuity errors where you don't see the blood that was on the shirt at first, and then another time later you do see it. And we get the bat sub that Hydra Boy is escaping in, and he throws a kid in the river, and Cap checks him. Don't worry, I can swim. Or go get him, I could swim. And it's like, well, that parent raised him right.
Yes, they did.
And so this guy cyanides himself with a tooth pill, and Erskine is dead, so they have to take samples from Steve's blood in order to try to reproduce the experiment.
Yeah.
So, what did we all think of the chase afterward and catching up to the guy only for him to self-delete, shall we say, because we can't say the other word on here? We'll start with Ambassador, and we'll go around the table.
Okay. It's a very high. It's a very intense chase scene. It's a very well choreographed chase scene, obviously. I almost feel like they didn't spend enough time on Erskine being shot, but at the same time, you can't. When we've got a high-paced action movie, you don't have a whole lot of time for smaller character moments. Although Erskine's death isn't a small character moment per se, but throughout the course of the movie, it does get mentioned more. It does get mentioned a few times, and you do have some payoff with it there. The cab getting the door off the cab, nice little comedic moment and everything in there. Another interesting thing, much like with Schmidt's car, the sub went through a lot of different designs, but they finally came down on this one that we see in the film, because there were other versions of it that where it was had different color schemes, it had different propulsion systems. I have to admit, this one fit well within the movie, the other designs of the other vehicles. And the Hydra agent removing himself from the equation, the cyanide capsule, again, another nice touch or anything, piece of tech that existed back then, even I imagine exists even nowadays. So and then of course you've got they don't have Erskine's formula. As far as we know, he didn't write down any notes. It was all in his head or whatever. And they're having to use Steve's blood and everything they'll use down the road to try and replicate the super soldier serum, which we'll see again which we saw in the Incredible Hulk. So those are my thoughts on that sequence.
All right, Riot.
I thought, I thought like the moments with like Steve like trying to get used to like the new buff body he's got are pretty funny. I honestly thought Erskine's death was a bit too quick for my taste, but it's okay in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, and then the hydration, that kind of I was expecting that, just due to the history of the group that it's a part of, so that kind of a thing. So yeah, those are my thoughts on it.
CS or Jacob?
For me, I felt like I agree with Riot Kitty that scene with Abraham dying. It was very, it was very quick. It's just kind of like, oh, he's shot. Oh, touching moment. Oh, and now he's out on the run. It was. I know it was probably done because they had, this movie is a big build-up movie. And it's building up to Captain America facing off against Red Skull, and so I know that there had to be times when they had to condense them down a little bit. That being said, I don't think it diminished the emotional impact of Abraham's death. This is someone who, for the first time in Steve's life, this was someone who connected with him, who actually saw potential in him, and for him to then go after the guy who ended this person's life to him. Yeah, I think it's great. And again, we go back to Joe Johnston's attention to detail, how Steve wouldn't be used to this body yet. He's not a robot. It's not like he just got an upgrade. He's got to field test it a little bit. And I thought that was really good on his part. It wasn't just some magic thing that happens and now Steve knows all. He has to train in this body. He has to go for it. And it's kind of funny later on, someone asked him when he finally gets, I know we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but it's referenced again later whenever he goes to Europe and someone says, "Are you ready for this?" And he says, I've punched Hitler over several dozen times or something like that. And this scene I thought was really great. And of course, I mean, you expect the the spy to take the easy way out and to cover his tracks. So I think that I honestly wasn't I wasn't expecting anything else. I guess I knew that was coming because there was no way he was going to talk, and I didn't think they would actually let him get away. So that's kind of my take on that sequence.
Okay, CS. I think she might be muted or she had to step away. Let me check. Yeah, she said she'll be right back. So, one of the things, trying to think through a fog of pain here, folks. I'm sorry. One of the things I liked about the sequence as well is that they did include the old spycraft of code or coded language when going into an installation with or that Ambassador brought it up, which was a nice little touch, as well as the trigger or the lighter trigger for the bomb is actually spycraft that was done way back in the day, which is also pretty nice as well. I think that, let's see here, the next talking point was Steve or Schmidt kills 3 Nazi officials. So 3 guys or the Nazi officials go into or to Hydra's camp and basically telling Schmidt that Hitler's had enough of his BS because he hadn't produced any weapons for him, and he ends up killing him. One of the things I like about that scene is he actually counts the 3 with his fingers before he triggers the weapon, just as they're realizing that he's gone rogue. And I also like his reaction when he misses one of them too. He's like, "God dang it," and gets him, and then he does the whole Hail Hydra. We'll start with Jake on this, and then go to Riot and Ambassador. What did you all think of the Schmidt going after the Nazi officials?
I have to admit this was kind of a confusing scene to me because, like, are we saying, is the Red Skull more evil than Hitler? Are we saying that, or is it just that it's this convoluted thing of, because, there were several attempts to have a coup against Hitler, right? Even among his officials. So I have to admit, from the historian in me was like, what are we trying to say here? What's the point of the scene? That being said, it was kind of satisfying to see them all get, wiped out. So even though we still have the Red Skull to contend with. But once again, this scene just really demonstrates to me how good of an actor Hugo Weaving is. He played it so cool. He, never lost his temper. It was very strategic. It, it kind of was he was basically, in my opinion, a better version of Ozymandias from Watchmen, which, don't waste your time on that movie if you haven't seen it. Golly, anyway, Red Skull in this scene is very cool, very calculating, and it just really goes to show you just what a significant threat he is and what he is becoming. So I really appreciate it about that. Just one of my favorite parts in this scene is when they look down at the map where he's got all the targets, and then one of the Nazi officials goes, "Wait a minute, Berlin is on this map." And I just thought, I have to admit, in the theater, I laughed. I was like, "Well played." That was actually a pretty good sequence there, where they just realized, "Oh, great, this guy is about to betray us." So, but anyway, really good, really well acted scene.
Oh yeah, that was kind of funny. And then it's just like they get blasted. Is it my turn?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
turn.
all right. Yeah, that was kind of funny, as I said. Just like, oh my god, we're getting betrayed, and I honestly think that was probably one of his best scenes where, Hugo Weaving's Red Skull. Yes, he's.
You're muted, Riot.
Oh, okay. I accidentally clicked the button. Okay. Okay. So as I was saying, I think this was probably Hugo Weaving's like Red Skull's best scenes, where it's just like he wasn't a maniacal crazy guy, but he's definitely calm and calculated. He's like, oh, I got discovered. Okay. And it's like I'm going to stick this weapon on all of you, and it was. I was a little bit weird, but also not unexpected, because one of the tropes of villains is just to kill their own guys. So yeah, I was just like, okay, yep, he's officially the main bad guy now. So, and that's about it for my thoughts. So,
Ambassador.
Sorry, it was chilly. It was you've got 3 Nazi officers there at Schmidt's base, and they're all berating him and belittling him like, good Nazi officers would, one of their own. Because let's be honest, Nazi officers were all assholes. I do love I as much as you're not supposed to like Schmidt, this particular scene, I'm like, oh goody, some Nazis are gonna get blowed up. This makes me happy. And Hugo Weaving, his portrayal of his performance in this scene, yeah, he's like, I missed. I'm not supposed to miss. I'm the bad guy. It's almost like that scene from Robin Hood Men in Tights, and Robin pulls out the script. He's like, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to lose. But yeah, honestly, the Nazi officer, of course Berlin would be on that map. It's a country's capital, you dunce. I mean, are all Nazis stupid? Can they not read a map? Apparently not.
He saw that it was tagged as a hostile, is what he was saying.
I know, but yes, I know. I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek orange here. But I will say one thing for the effect for the Tesseract powered weapons. I have to ask myself the question: all those people that got shot, did they get evaporated? Did they get disintegrated, or did they get teleported somewhere else?
That's actually a good question.
I have to ask myself that question because the Tesseract is the Infinity Space Stone. It's primary.
If I could throw in a nerd point here,
please, by all means.
Nerd points, go ahead.
the weapons are just powered by the Tesseract. They don't actually do what the Tesseract does. So in this nerd's humble opinion, and I will welcome any disagreement, I think that they were just vaporized. I don't think that they got teleported because it wasn't actually the Tesseract pointing at them and them beaming off. Had that happened, I would say they were just teleported somewhere. But because they just used them to power the weapons, I think that they just got vaporized.
Yeah, but it's more fun to think about a bunch of Nazi officers.
Oh,
flying
it's
around
totally
in
fun. I
space.
definitely agree. I definitely agree with you.
Although it's a little sad. Okay, it's a little.
I didn't
sad
sign up to be
about,
teleported into a strange planet.
or just out in the middle of deep space. Although I will say this, it is kind of a sad thought to think about our good boys in green and everything floating around in space or on an alien planet. So that part's a bit sad, but so I think maybe okay. For the American soldiers, they're just vaporized, honorable death. For the Nazis, transport into deep space or to some hostile alien planet where they're eaten by some big ugly.
The way I see it is, I think they said it best in Helsing Ultimate Abridged. Who gives a shit? They're Nazis.
That's true too.
So who were we on giving their thoughts?
CS is up. CS
Hey,
is
I'm
up.
back.
Yep.
Okay. Yes. And we're just talking about how the Nazis are the bad guys, and who cares?
No, we were talking about Schmidt killing the 3 Nazi officials.
Oh, okay. I think it's kind of like a dominant sort of move. So it's like, okay. That's all I really got right now. Sorry.
All right.
That's okay.
So
Jumped
the
in.
next scene is, let's see here.
Oh, the next scene is Steve getting recruited. Steve getting recruited as the war bonds boy.
Yep. They or Stark also admits that he has no idea how the technology works on the Hydra sub, as well as Phillips dismissing Rogers. He's like, "You're an experiment. You're going to Alamogordo," which, for those of you who don't know, World War II, Alamogordo was actually the scientific relay station for the Allied forces of the U.S.
Yeah.
We then get the nice little bail bonds situation war bonds, not bail bonds. My bad. The war bonds and one of the cool things I like is I have family in Buffalo, New York. So when I saw that he was visiting Buffalo, that was a nice little touch. Nice. And he's also doing little movies and skits, which is pretty nice. What did you all think of the Star Spangled Man with the plan?
Sorry, you say that, it makes me laugh.
It's nice to see the cheesy propaganda, considering all the propaganda's, more complicated.
Oh, if this was in a warmer environment, it would have been nice to see him wear something a little skimpy.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, Ryan.
I'm just saying.
I know. I'll if it's okay, Orange, I'll kind of kick off this part. Okay, I want to go back to something very briefly. I know this is past the Infinity Saga, but I want to reference something that a lot of people had a beef with, and that's Captain America the musical, which is shown in Hawkeye. And this whole sequence is, in fact, a musical sequence slap dab right in the middle of an action adventure movie. Why is it wrong in Hawkeye, but it's okay here? Both are equally cringe, both are equally cheesy, but both are equally fun. All right. That being said,
well,
go ahead,
maybe I'm going to be honest. Well, trying to understand the perspectives. Maybe it was misplaced in Hawkeye and then natural in Captain America, because this was written into the plot, right? Like, so it's just like, yeah, he's Captain America, he's the first super soldier. They're gonna parade him around and show him off to be like, yeah, here he is. Here's our boy in blue. Like, look how cool he is. Like that kind of a thing. I don't know.
And also, they did those kinds of propaganda shows to collect war bonds because they were desperate for funding. I mean, that's a historical thing.
Yes, I agree. That is all true. As far as okay, I'll say it. The choreography was incredibly well done, and I'm not sure how they did Steve holding the motorcycle with the 3 girls sitting on top of it. But my feeling is it was probably rigging of some sort. But it was I won't lie, it was a very fun sequence, and Senator Brandt's like, you want to really serve your country? He's like, that's all I want to do. Oh, Lord, poor Steve. I feel bad for him. He's like, I was built to kill Nazis, not sell war bonds, you idiot. He's like, I went through all that to kill Nazis and to win a war, not to sell war bonds. Go do it yourself, you lazy politician. You can tell I don't like politicians, like, at all, except for maybe a handful, if that. But that whole sequence, JoJo, whoever did the lyrics, it was great. It was absolutely great. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Who's next?
Personally, I like the propaganda stuff because it used to be so easy, you know?
Yes.
Yep. Now it's a lot more complicated and a lot more malicious, I think. So.
And how?
I also kind of like this part of the movie. I know a lot of people don't like this movie because it doesn't move the plot forward, but it's a character thing. It shows you that Steve wasn't just like automatically granted this role in the army, and he had a very different place in mind for himself even before he got shipped out. So it's almost like the calm before the storm in many ways, and it gives you that moment to breathe, where you're kind of caught on it's an unexpected sort of thing. So, and you can also tell like he gets increasingly frustrated and he wants to do more. He doesn't want to just be the glorified poster boy.
One of the things I will also acknowledge is that where Steve being all muscular coming out of the pod was the women's scene for the ladies. This scene was basically for the men because of all the ladies dressed up skimpy. So who else hasn't given their thoughts? I think Jake hasn't.
Well, for me, I know this is getting into sort of dangerous sort of philosophical meanderings as if it were. But one of the things that I think about this sequence is it kind of reminds me of the modern comic book industry. You are kind of cutting
in and out for me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Like I know there's like robot mic or something.
Oh, sorry about that. I don't know why it's doing that. But anyway, I feel like it's more. It reminds me a little bit about the modern comic book industry. So they have these great characters, but then they just slap their branding on it, and then they put it out there, but it's nothing like what it truly is, how great it is. I know that sounds cheesy. I'll own it, but that kind of reminded me of this last time I watched it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the comic book industry. They have this great character, and they and I'm talking specifically about comic books. They have this great character. Mm-hmm. They're gonna hire a great cover artist, but when you open it up, it's nothing but vapid nonsense and a terrible artist that they hired probably from Tumblr, and and they just expect you to consume it, but really it's just the character desires to be put in its where it's supposed to be, like Steve does. He wants to be out in the battlefield. He wants to fight. He wants to be there with Bucky. He wants to be taking on the enemy. So I know that sounds a little cheesy, maybe a little cringy, but that was this last time watching it, I was thinking that I was like, hey, this sequence kind of reminds me of what's going on right now in modern comics.
That's why I don't read modern comics.
Speaking of comic books, fun little note here. The very first Captain America comic was reintroduced and redone for this scene because you also see the comics going out of him punching out Hitler, the very famous cover.
Yeah.
And also he knocks out Hitler a bunch of times on stage. Which was
that was actually pre-Marvel. I think that was when he was still with Timely Comics.
I think so, yeah.
Might have been.
So then we get to him being in Italy in 1943, where he's 5 miles from the front. Who wants to help me suck old Adolf on the job? And you see frickin' Hodge basically still in the group, busting his chops. One dude moons him, and they start throwing rotten fruit. How do these people end up with frickin' rotten tomatoes all the time? But it does make a person wonder. And so then he's drawing in his little book where Peggy Carter shows up, and he learns that the 107th has been, or is the recent major casualties. And well, we know that Barnes is in the 107th, so he goes and asks Phillips if Barnes was a casualty, and they think he is. And he's like, "Are we planning a rescue mission?" "Yeah, it's called Winning the War." "Well, if you know where they are, they're 30 miles behind the lines. We are in some of the most heavily fortified mountain or terrain in Europe, but I don't expect you to understand that because you're a chorus girl." I mean, the way that Phillips just rips into him and is so dismissive of him is so freaking, it's like, oh my God, man. But I do like how Peggy does stand with Steve and helps him with the help of Stark getting into Zano and behind the lines, which Stark also drops the late night fondue. And it's like, so do you two fondue? I mean, that is the cheesy, that was folks, no joke. When I was getting freaking Valentine cards for kids for Valentine's Day and stuff, that shit was on a freaking Valentine's Day card. Do you two fondue, or do you want a fondue? And I'm like, that is extremely inappropriate for kids.
No, it isn't.
I am so glad they won't understand it. But I'm like, oh my God. But yeah. So what did you guys think of the front and basically Steve going rogue? We'll start with the ladies first. We'll start with CS first, then Riot.
I think this is another pivotal point where it's been building. It's like been something that's been building up. It's being built up throughout the story where he can finally do something, and nobody else is doing anything, and there's just stuff that needs to be done. But he's on the front, and it's his time and opportunity, and he's got to go for it, and he does. So it's like I said, it's a great character moment. It's a good action moment. And it's kind of one of those points of no return. So in the story, it's like there's, this is just something that he's been waiting for, and there's no going back after this.
For me, I like obviously like it was kind of like from that happy, cheery vibe to like, oh yeah, this is like the front lines, and everybody's kind of just like had enough of war already, pretty much, and. Now Steve finally gets his chances because he's basically been paraded around like a mascot instead of actually going to go and fight, which is what he wanted. But, it's like, yeah, but also just to save his friend as well. Like, as you saw, like, he'd give his life for his fellow soldiers, even if that means he'd die. So it's like, even if he died, at least he tried to do something, right? That's kind of what I saw of that scene with him, like, going rogue and, just, like, trying to go save his friend.
Ambassador, then Jake.
Okay. You feel legitimate remorse if you feel sadness for Steve in that moment. I mean, yeah, the other soldiers are ribbing him, not unjustifiably so, because he's there as a glorified mascot. And they're like, "We don't want a mascot. Send out the dames. Send out the chorus line." And he's sitting back there doodling his little sketchbook. He essentially sees himself as a performing monkey on a unicycle. And you're like, yeah, you can empathize with him, because that's not what Erskine was wanting him to do. He was wanting him to be a hero. He was wanting him to actually fight and make a difference on the battlefield. And you see the pain on Steve's face when he learns that his best friend, the guy that had his back when he was the little scrawny guy, could potentially be dead. And Phillips just completely, he rips into him, and that's the common theme. And I think throughout the majority of this. Now, there is one deleted scene where Phillips does pay him a compliment. We'll get to that when we get to that. And it's a very powerful moment for Steve. He's like, "Screw it, I am done being the mascot." He's like, "I'm gonna go save my buddy. I'm gonna see who else I can save." He's like, as the old saying goes, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." So that was my thoughts. Jake, you're up, buddy.
I was excited for this part. I was waiting with I love it when the hero in story. I'm a sucker for these sequences where the hero is told no, but he takes a yes anyway. I think it was really appropriate. The interesting thing is Phillips is kind of right? Even though Steve went through this procedure and he's gotten the super soldier serum, he doesn't really have any experience in war or in battle. I mean, sure, he got some basic training, but that doesn't account for, Phillips, experience. So in some ways, Phillips was right, but it was up for Steve to make him wrong. And this sequence leading up to the rescue, I think, was really good. I love the little quote about fondue, which of course they bring it back around later. But yeah, I think it's really cool. I think it's great that Stark trusted Peggy enough where he would pull this off, because I guarantee you, the army doesn't want Stark off in the battlefield, right? Because he's a genius. They want him behind the scenes, designing the weapons and being a good little boy. So for him to trust Carter enough to help Steve get to the point that he needs to get to, I think that that shows a lot of really good character for Howard, and something we, Tony doesn't get to see, right, in the greater MCU. So it was really cool getting to see these moments with him.
Yeah. Well, I'll make one more real quick comment. The fact that Steve has no idea what fondue is, and he thinks it's something obscene rather than being something, mundane like food. Like, Steve literally has lived under a rock. He doesn't even know what fondue is. We all know what fondue is. It's melted cheese and bread, essentially.
Yep. So we now get to the Hydra base, and they're using up the workers. We also get the introduction to the Howling Commandos. My favorite introduction was Neil McDonough's Dum Dum Dugan.
Oh, yeah.
And I love that. He's like, Fritz, one of these days I'm going to have a stick of my own. And I just love that. So, also the British guy, Falsworth, for those of you who do not know, in the comics, he is a superhero and a super soldier. himself. He actually becomes Union Jack.
Yep.
Which is a nice little test to those in the chat. And I really do like this scene because it shows that Steve is using the shield very practically. But we then learn that, well, it's not completely indestructible because that's not the vibranium shield yet. And I do like how he also grabs one of the magazines of the Tesseract energy, which it's like, okay, bring intel back to the back to base, gather intel. And we then see him taking on the Hydra base, and I love when he frees the guys. They're like, who are you? I'm Captain America. Beg your pardon? And so they're like, you know what you're doing? Yeah, I knocked out Adolf Hitler over 200 times. And I'm like, okay. So, yeah. And they're all looking at each other. Now, a funny thing here, the Asian guy, Kenneth Choi, actually plays in a later MCU film, plays as the principal, I believe, in Spider-Man Homecoming.
I think you're right.
Yep, it is him. I checked that yesterday, and I was like, God, he looks familiar. And so we then see Dum Dum Dugan getting in the big tank, and the black soldier, I can't remember his name, I'm sorry.
Gabe,
like,
Gabe something.
Yep, Gabe. And he's like, not exactly a Buick, that one, Zungdung. Right. Didn't know he spoke German. Two semesters in college, switched to French. The girls were much cuter. It's like, okay, well, yeah, that works. I mean, you just go to college for the girls. Good to know. So, what did you all think of this sequence before we get to rescuing Bucky? The fight in the yard and breaking into the Hydra base. We'll start with Jacob, and then Ambassador, then the ladies.
I love the Howling Commandos. They are really great characters, and as you pointed out, the insertion of Union Jack, who is one of the Invaders, which was a kind of a proto Avengers group that Captain America led. That was really cool. I think that a lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of the Howling Commandos transitioned to becoming the first field agents for S.H.I.E.L.D., and including Dum Dum Dugan, he was one of their field commanders. He worked very closely with Colonel Nick Fury, who of course is General Fury's father. I do think that was kind of a missed opportunity in this film, that they could have had Fury in this sequence, the original Nick Fury, since Marvel has established that the current General Nick Fury is the son of Colonel Fury. I think that would have been a good way to put him in and make that connection. They didn't. Say la vie. That's how it goes sometimes. But I did like this sequence. It was really funny when the first time I read the Howling Commandos was they actually did a crossover with Godzilla, as bizarre as that sounds. So that was kind of it was the Howling Commandos further down into the future, obviously, because also the Fantastic Four were involved. But it was at that time they were now a part of S.H.I.E.L.D. But it was that was my first exposure to them as a comic book reader. So seeing them in this context, in their original formation as soldiers who were on the front lines of World War II, I thought that was pretty cool. How they brought it to life.
Yeah, honestly, the whole sequence and everything of Steve breaking into the Hydra base, it's a great action sequence. One thing I want to comment on that we've not really touched on, I can't remember. I'm pretty sure this came out after, but Joe Johnston had done a sequel to another film franchise, Jurassic Park. He did Jurassic Park 3, and a lot of people derided him for it because it wasn't Spielberg who had done Jurassic Park 3. Honestly, I really enjoyed Jurassic Park 3. Not that it was a great movie, but it was a good movie. But I think Johnson did a really good job with this film, considering how many character story beats there were. But I think he handled primarily. I think when he was handling the action sequences, that's where his directorial ability really shines through. And Steve breaking into the base, releasing the prisoners, and them starting to bust out and everything, and take on the Hydra troops there on the base. I mean, obviously, some of them do get taken out. But there are, as the old saying goes, there are casualties in war. No one's not going to get. Everybody's not going to make it out alive. But it does show that Steve is a quick learner. It does show that he does take the little bit of basic training that he did have and apply it here, and then the rest is improvisation, which is a credit to Steve as well and everything. Because not only did the Super Soldier Serum enhance him physically, but it also enhanced him mentally as well. So, but those are my thoughts on the breakout.
All right, Riot.
Oh, the whole thing with him, I punched Hitler a bunch of times. I'm ready. And it's just like, I love those kind of themes where it's just like, hello. It's just like, I'm the one that's gonna kick your butt, and then everyone's like, who? Who are you? It's like he's up and coming, right? So obviously he breaks in, and he's going to finally be the soldier he always wanted to be, and after like being paraded around like a mascot.
Yep. I kind of agree with all of that. I mean, like, it is kind of like, again, that moment where he's been waiting for this, and it's finally his opportunity to show what he can do. And it turns out he does it really well.
Okay, so then we get to him actually finding Steve, and Zola is,
You mean Bucky?
Bucky.
Yeah.
And then Zola grabs some schematics from his lab because Schmidt turned on self-destruct sequences. Now, if you pay close attention to those schematics, they're actually for the robot suit that he is known for. And Steve notices Bucky, and Bucky is supposedly just blabbering gibberish, but he's actually giving his freaking name, rank, and number, which is the only things you're allowed to give when you are held captive. Your name, your rank, and your ID, your military ID number. Essentially, you're not allowed to give anything else other than that. And then I love, he's like, Steve, Bucky, Steve. He's like, thought you were dead. Thought you were smaller. And he's asking, he's like, what happened to you? I joined the army. Did it hurt? Little. Is it permanent? So far. I mean, the way that they were just talking, and then we get the showdown between Red Skull and Captain America, the brief bit of it. And when Hugo Weaving does his punch that dents the shield, this is where you see his training from the Matrix, when he learned how to do his punches in that movie, because it was an Agent Smith punch, a really quick Agent Smith punch that he does. And it's like, oh damn, he actually bent that shield. And then we get the reveal, because you see the scars underneath his ears that go down his neck, which implies the mask. But then you get the face reveal, and it's like, yeah, that's creepy. Which they actually even further digitally enhanced with, because they put lines or tracking dots on the mask itself to kind of get rid of the nose projection, which worked like really well. And I love how when Zola's escaping, or Schmidt's going up to the roof, and he's like, well, what about me? Where will I sit? Not a scratch, doctor. Not a scratch. And he gives him the freaking hydromobile. And I'm like, dude, Zola, when he says not a scratch, not a scratch. He'll kill you. So then they succeed in rescuing 1,000 men, and Phillips is excoriating
400.
or 400, but he ends up saving over 1,000. But anyway, he ends up excoriating what's her name, Carter, until he sees that everybody is returning back and Captain America's at the front. And he couldn't call his ride because, well, that little piece of machinery got blown up. And Phillips calls it quick. He's like, America's golden boy is dead because you had a crush. And he sees this. He knows exactly what's going on. And Steve is so humble because he's like, I'd like to surrender myself for disciplinary action, because he went technically he went AWOL. But yeah, so what do you all think of rescuing Bucky, showdown with the Red Skull, brief, and returning with the soldiers? We'll start with the ladies first, starting with CS.
I think she just said she just sent a message that her internet went out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's in the private.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, go
Right.
with Riot. Yeah.
Right, you're up, kid.
Okay. So with rescuing, with like the showdown with the Red Skull, that was super tense and high octane because kind of like I guess it's more so to deal with like the direction of the camera going around, and like it's kind of like this weird like it's just like basically just a thin bridge, and like there's one guy's on the one side and one guy's on the other side, and it's just I don't know, it was really really tense. I'm going to be honest, so it was really well done in kind of making it be a little bit scary, and then just like oh my god, this is the bad guy, they're finally meeting face to face, that kind of epicness. And then with rescuing Bucky, like it's just it's just like, yeah, he's found his friend, but no, not it wasn't in the way he wanted it to be. And not like I guess like it's just like they're kind of just there's a lot of stuff going on. I'm kind of like I'm getting a little tired, so don't mind me on that. But yeah, that's all I gotta say on that.
All right, we'll go with Ambassador.
It's a great emotional moment between Bucky or Steve's rescuing Bucky, and it's a nice comedic moment at the same time as well. He's like, "Thought you were smaller." He's like, "Thought you were dead." Brevity is indeed the soul of wit, and they kept it short, they kept it succinct, and that's one of the advantages when you have good writers. They can write a good line, keep it brief, and it makes it funny. As for the big reveal, at least to the rest of us, of Mr. Johann Schmidt, aka the Red Skull, he's like, you behind the shield. I embrace who I am proudly. You look like the mask of the Red Death from Edgar Allan Poe. What's to be proud of? I mean, okay, yeah, it is a cool design. It's very accurate to the comics and everything. And Hugo Weaving, he delivers those lines. He's like, I'm a great fan of your films. I'm doing a somewhat exaggerated German accent. Forgive me, it's not perfect. But you see that they are very equally matched at this point, because even though he does knock Steve on his ass, Steve turns right around and knocks him on his ass too. And then you, of course, have you have everybody escaping from the complex because it is going critical. It's blowing up. I have to admit, it was a good line. Not a scratch, doctor, not a scratch. I sure as hell wouldn't scratch that car. I'd love it too much. I'd be like, okay, I'm not hitting anything. I'm not running into anything. I actually may just take this car and say, screw it, I'm leaving. Bye. You go fight your war. I'm keeping the car. I'll take off the hood ornament. This is a sweet car.
I'll drive it into the sunset. The hype German babe.
I'll turn myself over to the Americans. I'd like, here, you want a prototype for a brand new car? All yours. I surrender peacefully. What do you want to know?
I'll be arrested for selling the secrets of German automobiles to the Americans.
Well, advance automobiles to the Americans, regardless of the make.
The Volkswagen.
But yeah. That's not a Volkswagen. Volkswagen could never build anything that good. Yes, I said, and I regret nothing.
The Beatles. Or the bugs. Anyway,
those are my thoughts. And the Volkswagen Beetle is a piece of crap cooled by air and built by Nazis.
All right, Jacob.
Everyone did a good job describing the connection between Steve and Bucky. So just to add another point onto, what was going on with the Red Skull, we knew that he's not only a mental threat, he's also a physical threat, but we actually get to see how big of a threat he is to Captain America, right? It kind of reminds me of the scene in The Dark Knight when Batman kind of confronts the Joker in the interrogation room. They had met previously at the party scene, but this is where they actually get to have their standoff, and we get to see how big of a threat the Joker is to Batman. And so in this scene, we get to see that with the Red Skull and Captain America with it's really interesting because they didn't do like this big dramatic face. He's slowly he just kind of rips off his mask and chucks it. And, it's a devil may care. I'm here to bomb the world and take names. And I think that was a really, really good way to show how he's not just this incredibly powerful villain, but he's also a threat to the hero, as in, in the sequence when he bends the shield. So thought that was really cool.
And welcome back to CS Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that.
Yep, it's okay. It happens.
Sometimes it just drops. I think it's just, it just drops every couple of hours.
Get out of the dinosaur era.
I need to get a new router probably. So.
Oh, believe me, I know what that's like too. So what did you think of the Saving Bucky Red Skull and the Red Skull battle? But, engagement. It's not really the battle yet.
I thought it was very dramatic. I like all the colors. Like there's such, all the fire and all the explosions and kind of like the big surrounding sort of, there's a lot of tension. It's very clear that there's a lot of tension. And you kind of are left to like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? It's nice that he gets to see Bucky and he rescues him, and it's part of their camaraderie. I think this is part of the reason why I'm okay with them changing Bucky from the comics to the movie, is that they're really good. They have really good friendship. So like Steve was saved by Bucky at the beginning, he gets to kind of pay him back in like a bigger way. That's nice.
Alrighty. So then we are. What is the next scene here? Sorry. Oh, excuse me.
Next scene is
he skips out
back at the base.
No, we already covered that. He's declared K also, so he's skipping out on his Medal of Valor with the Stan Lee cameo. And he recruits the Howling Commandos to take out the bases. The Scrawny Doubles cameo, Leander Denny, I think his name is. And Peggy has eyes only for Steve. She comes in that red dress, that did it for me. It's like,
Oof.
holy crap.
Oof.
Lady in red.
A beautiful lady in red.
Very much so.
And
she
I
just
say
has
that as a
eyes
happily
for
married
Steve.
man.
Yep. And then we get the Steve accidentally kisses Jamie Moriarty from Elementary, but instead she is the secretary to Colonel Phillips.
Oh, and she was also in
Hunger Games.
Yeah, she was in
Camera Lady.
Crap. Mockingjay
Yep.
Part 1 and 2. Yeah.
Yep. As the Camera Lady. And
Yeah.
Peggy catches him. And it's like, oh shit. So he's like, well, how do I know that you and Stark haven't been fun doing? And I'm like, oh dear God, man. And I just love the look that she gives him. You still don't know a bloody thing about women. Fondue is just cheese and bread, my friend. Really? I didn't think, and nor should you, pal. Once you start thinking what's going on in a girl's mind, your goose is well and truly cooked. So we see that Stark is innovative with his shields, and he has one that almost looks like it has missile launchers and shit. But Steve goes for the humble choice, the saucer choice, the saucy saucer that's made out of vibranium that Peggy Carter takes complete advantage of and decides to air out her frustration by firing 3 rounds at Steve. And I love how Steve and Stark are they're like, I have some ideas for the universe or for the uniform. Yeah, whatever you want, pal. So we then get the montage of Captain America plowing through Hydra's forces. Red Skull's getting very pissed off about it. And he ends up killing his own men. He also has an upgraded pistol to what he used to have now that they have Tesseract weapons. I like how Steve's M1911A1, which is his 45, is actually painted gunmetal blue. Not America blue, not navy blue, but gunmetal blue, because they actually incorporate a little bit of gunmetal gray in it, which is pretty cool. And I really do like how they established the vibranium. It's completely vibration absorbent. And I'm thinking to myself, well, then if that was the case, it wouldn't really make too much sound, would it? But that doesn't really translate well when you're doing a movie. So I like the sound effects that they give the shield. Plus, we get that lovely shot that I turned into a GIF for Captain America where he's throwing the shield at the screen, which the 3D artists had a field day with. So what do we think of the war montage and also Captain America having Peggy's face in her compass or in his compass, and she's seeing this, and Phillips is getting a good chuckle out of it. It's like, hey, you're Captain America's girlfriend. So what did we all think of all of this? We'll start with CS.
Oh, well, I never really liked moments where, like, I don't know, anybody's really teased for their romantic feelings for someone else. So, kind of a bit of a.
Wasn't really too much of a tease. It was just him looking over there and smiling at her while she's like, oh my God, what did you just fucking do?
I don't know. I still didn't really like this scene that much. So,
right.
Or the like I said, I'm a romantic, so I don't really appreciate people who aren't romantic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even Steve closed it up when he realized the cameraman was focusing in on that too much. He's like, God damn it, what are you looking at that for?
Yeah.
So, what did you think of the rest of the war montage?
It's good. Finishes out the beat really nicely. This is like the overcoming the first challenge.
All right.
Yep, good stuff. I will say, like, good writing to the scenes and everything, and good character development and good acting and making it all come together. It really only sticks out if it's bad. And I didn't really think anything was bad at this point. Very easy to get caught up in the story and the overall, just kind of fall into it.
All righty. And Riot.
It's like the teasing, well, kind of a little bit of teasing scene. It's kind of like almost like, it's basically like coworkers dating, and so everybody else knows, and it's like, like it's just like, I don't. It's kind of amusing. Honestly, it really is. It's not that hilarious, but it's just like kind of like one of those things. Like, okay, got a good snort out of me. With the war montage, it's just kind of like it kind of just brings together like, yeah, this was what Steve wanted. So finally, he's on the front lines. He's actually helping soldiers and all this other stuff. He's finally getting to do what he originally wanted to do, what he joined the military, what he took the super soldier serum to begin with. So it's really cool. It's just like tying that all in a nice little bow with like that character arc and like getting, Captain America really elevated, as like a hero. So like,
All right. Jacob.
I really like the war montage. I think it really showed what kind of situation they were in and how Steve is stepping up and becoming a captain. And just one note on the shield reveal of Steve picking it. I read somewhere that Joe Johnson, when they were in the early script phase of the film, they actually had talked about upgrading the shield a little bit. And Johnson admitted he wasn't really familiar with the comics, so he went to comic shops and actually found a comic book store where it was all decorated in Captain America. And he asked the owner, "Hey, did you hear they're making a Captain America movie?" And the guy was like, "Oh yeah, we haven't had anything, since the early '90s. I'm pretty excited." And he said, "Well, what's something that the filmmaker could get wrong that would totally ruin the movie?" And the comic book guy pointed to a replica of the shield he had, which, remember, this is even before the movie's out. So he has like a metal Captain America shield above his cash register. And he says that everyone wants to upgrade it with new technology, but it just works better as a symbol and as a giant boomerang. So if a filmmaker was to make a movie, they need to get the shield correct. And I just think that's really cool that Johnson took that to heart, and he even kind of does a wink and a nod to it, right? Where Steve is going through all the shields, and there's all these high tech ones, and like you said, one with a missile launcher, and one that's like a riot shield, and whatnot. But then he picks the humble choice. So I think that was really cool that Johnson took that to heart. That if only modern comic book filmmakers would do more things like that to get an idea of the character they're presenting. But I always thought that was cool. And of course, the epic scene where he throws the shield at the camera, really the icing on the cake on it to show what a symbol Captain America is becoming.
Well, I was just going to say, wow, somebody actually tried to do their research. So,
all right, Ambassador.
We've all either been in or we've worked at places where there have been on the job of relationships. I mean, even for a time, me and my man Ambassador worked at the same place and everything for a while. And I don't see Phillips looking over at her and giving her a little chuckle and everything, it being necessarily being malicious. I think he realizes, even before she did, that she cared about Steve. Even when she was miffed at him because he made that really boneheaded assertion that her and Stark had been fond doing. Steve has never had a chance to be in a relationship or have a girl even be interested in her. So he's going to have some self-confidence issues. And while I can understand Peggy's reaction to seeing another woman kiss him, she's like, "Hey, I came to the pub in that red dress. That should be a massive red flag for Steve. Like, hey, she dressed up for you, but Steve isn't familiar with all of that." So Phillips being a little ribbing her just a little bit, and Steve, Steve's like, "Hey, I still like you. I'm gonna have your picture in my compass for heaven's sake." That whole dynamic, that whole sequence, never really bothered me because I've done the same thing to coworkers myself, or anything, and people have did it to me and Madam Ambassador when we were working together. Never bothered us.
Mhm.
As far as the them taking out the Hydra bases, there is one thing that I did want to comment on when he's pointing out all the locations, and he's like, "This guy, quick look at the map," and she's like, "Well, nobody's perfect."
Yeah.
I love that. I love that sort of banter. It's a nice little callback to another Paramount owned franchise, of course, being Star Trek.
Yeah.
They particularly with Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 4. Um, as far as the whole montage of them taking out the Hydra bases and Red Skull in his car, and he's furious, and then we get that very classic line and everything, "You are failing."
Yeah, he lays the
He
blame
is,
on anybody else, but not himself.
yeah, and Zola is failing, but here's the thing: Zola is a scientist, not a soldier. He's like, "This is outside of my expertise." He's like, "I design the weapons, I don't shoot them."
I do not fire them. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, "I just build and design them."
So
And
we
go ahead. That's pretty much it.
we gotta get it going because we're getting on 3 hours and the pain is starting to get bigger.
Yep. I actually was gonna interrupt and say I have to head out because my kids have school tomorrow. So
Alrighty.
yep. But thank you again as always for having me. It's nice chatting with you guys, and I'm glad you made it this week, Jake. So
Alrighty. Thank you for
Listen,
coming
Jay.
on, CJ.
yep.
See you,
Thank you.
CJ. Have a good
Yeah,
night.
CJ.
Thanks.
Yep. So we then get to the train sequence where we lose Bucky and Zola is captured also from the same sequence. I gotta say that when Bucky lost, or when Bucky died, I didn't know anything about the Winter Soldier yet, so that actually kind of hit me too. And it's like, oh damn, dude, they put real stakes in this. And Zola, one of the lines when he's being interrogated is, "You do realize that's nuts, right? The insanity of the plan has no consequence, or is of no consequence." And why is that? Because he can do it. What's his target? His target is everywhere. Now, they think that Zola is able to be turned around. He's able to be redeemed. Zola's fully in the Hydra camp at this point. He has, or he was given no restrictions to his ability to do anything. He's fully a zealot for Hydra. And so also we learned that Steve can't get drunk after losing Bucky. I mean, that really does suck. And we see that Schmidt has a big Valkyrie plane. And he also has quite a few followers. So, what did we think of the train sequence and the interrogation? We'll start with Riot Kitty first.
Honestly, yeah, the Bucky's death is really sad. It's just like it's like kind of like you do everything you could, and you still can't save everybody. And the fact that Steve can't even get drunk for a night, just try to forget, is just like, yeah, that sucks. Yeah, it's going to be seared in your brain. Have fun with that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and so yeah, Bucky definitely showed that he was a good soldier right up until the end, and unfortunately that was not enough to get him out of there alive. Unfortunately, so.
Alrighty, and the interrogation scene.
Oh. I'm blanking.
It's okay.
I'm blanking on the interrogation scene. I can't recall it very well, unfortunately.
It's okay. Jake.
It was very emotional for me. I knew about the Winter Soldier, but I wasn't sure if they were going to go that route with Sebastian Stan, or because other characters have been called the Winter Soldier, so I wasn't sure if they were going to use Bucky or not. But I have to admit I was a little suspicious because falling is not always lethal in these types of films, and not just in comic book but in action. So I was kind of suspicious that maybe this wasn't a permanent death. But not totally convinced. I still thought it was very emotional, and especially the sequence when he's talking with Peggy. As for the interrogation, I was you can kind of see Zola is thinking this through. Like, he's telling them about what's going on, and as you point out, he's sold out for Hydra, but you can kind of tell that he's thinking the long game here. He's like, I've been captured. I'll give them just what they need to know just to get them to leave me alone. But then he's got something in the background, which of course we'll talk more about when we discuss Winter Soldier.
All right. Ambassador.
We all deal with the death of a loved one or a friend differently. Steve deals with it in the best way he knows how. Tries to get drunk. I've never lost I've lost friends, I've lost family. So I can understand where Steve's coming from. I think we all can, because we've all lost people in our lives that we cared about. But this was Steve's main guy. This was his closest, dearest, oldest friend. And he's not taking it well.
Yep.
Many people wouldn't. And it does immensely stink that the poor guy is trying to drown his sorrows and he can't drown them.
Nope.
So, but as far as the interrogation scene goes, yeah, if I had been Phillips, I would have been like, okay, you're going to work for us, but you're going to have a leash. A very short leash. But unfortunately, they don't think that far ahead and everything. They don't think that he's going to do everything that he does. And obviously, they don't think he's going to roboticize himself, essentially. But obviously, he does. But we'll get to that when we get to that.
Yep. So we then get to the final battle at Schmidt's hidden base in the Alps. And I love this line, Steve gets caught by the Hydra forces while he's on his way into the base. And I love how Red Skull confronts me. He's like, so what makes you so special? Nothing. I'm just a kid from Brooklyn. And we get the final test of the flight of the Valkyrie and the kiss between Carter and Steve. And I absolutely love the line, I'm not kissing you, from Colonel Phillips.
Yeah.
So one of the things I really liked about the scene where the U.S. is invading the Hydra base is like, cut off one head, 2 more shall. Let's go find 2 more.
Yeah.
I mean, Phillips just knocked that one right, or Tommy Lee Jones knocked that right out of the park.
Yes, he did.
So we get into the Valkyrie, and one of the things they have the Hydra guys getting ready to go into their little mini drones to shoot down the city because they're going to the East Coast. And they get into the New York one, which manages to have a pilot in it. And you actually see a guy get diced in this movie, folks.
Oh yeah.
The red smear is what I call it because they can't exactly show anything other than what they showed. But they actually showed it that this dude got freaking sliced up. And we have, or after Steve stops them, he gets back into the vehicle or into the Valkyrie, sorry. And we get the final fight where the Red Skull is then banished from Earth by the Tesseract to the outer branches of Yggdrasil, which we all know he ends up on Vormir.
Yeah.
And his sacrifice. And one of the things I love about that scene is Tommy Lee Jones tells what's his name? Without saying the words, he just points to leave the room because he knows what's about to happen. And this is where how Steve ends up in the ice after the Tesseract also melts out of the Valkyrie. So going through all those scenes, how did you guys think of them? We'll start with Riot Kitty.
So for on the Valkyrie, I think it's just like one of those classic movie fights, it's just like two guys beating the crap out of each other, I think.
So visceral, isn't it?
Yes, basically. And yeah, it's just the final confrontation. It's really intense, that kind of a thing. And then moving on to the Red Skull basically getting
yeeted.
Yeah, it's like viscerated. Honestly, it kind of reminded me of Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's just like face melting off. Only this time, it's just like, it's just like it's being booted to like space time or whatever. So I always love those defeats where it's just like, yeah, the villain's just killed by whatever they're after this whole time. So that's just one of those classic movie villain defeats, which is really good. And also it was very scary. Like I said, I believe this movie to be like a quarter horror. So it's just like kind of like you see like it just like peeling away from that plane of existence. And it's just like it's a little bit gruesome, I'm not gonna lie.
All right. Ambassador.
It's a great buildup. It's a great final battle and everything, them busting into the base. And the thing, it's rare to see good banter or anything. And the banter between Red Skull and Cap is some of the best or anything. There's some other good examples in the MCU, even nowadays. But the banter between those two, the mental dueling, it's very nicely done. Them taking the Hydromobile, and Phillips and her and Peggy and Cap are in there, and the line, no more need be said. Tommy Lee Jones' delivery, he has some great one-liners in this movie, and the people say that Tommy Lee Jones doesn't have a comedic bone in his body. Watch this movie. Yes, he does. Even in his latter years, he has some good comedic chops. It has to be crafted just the right way for it to work with him. One thing I do want to comment on, I don't know if anybody else picked up on this besides myself, but when Red Skull is starting to being teleported, did anybody notice that the effect bore a resemblance to the teleportation effect for the Bifrost, or was it just me?
It was similar, yes.
Okay, because the thing you have to remember, and Schmidt mentions this at the beginning of the movie, the Tesseract was the crown jewel of Odin's trophy room.
Yep.
Odin once had ownership of the Tesseract. My question is, how did he lose it? There's a plot. There's a nice little side story that somebody could craft to tell how Odin got the Tesseract, but then lost it, because that's something.
He
That's
didn't
a
lose it.
backstory.
He
Huh?
gave it to the people of Earth. It's in the script, or it's in the images that Schmidt was studying. He gave it to the people of Earth because of how much they worshipped him, and so he entrusted the Tesseract to them.
Oh, okay. I guess I missed that part. All right, fair enough. Damn, interesting, really.
Yep.
So, but yeah, and as far as it breaks, I don't care how many times I've watched this movie. And I've watched it a fair amount of times. It still breaks my heart that Steve has to wait decades later before he finally gets to have his. And no, I don't mean this as a perverted joke. He doesn't get to have his happy ending until much later on with Peggy.
Yep. All
That's
right.
that's the heartbreaking part of this.
Yeah. Jake.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic final battle. They both Hugo Weaving and Chris Evans do a great job in it. As Ambassador pointed out, a lot of great dialogue. I do think it's interesting because we were talking about this earlier, that the Tesseract and the other Infinity Stones seem to have a sort of sentient, and so they're a little picky with who they want to rule them, it seems, early on, but then later on they don't seem so picky. So it is interesting to see the ebbs and flow of coming from this movie, because a lot of the lore that became part of the MCU specifically comes from this movie, because it's a prequel to Iron Man, the Incredible Hulk, and Thor, and it introduces the Tesseract. It introduces so many aspects, sort of the fantasy aspects of it, and I think that the scene when the Tesseract sort of banishes Red Skull, which, as we point out, we find out deep into space, and he has to become the guardian of the Soul Stone, so to speak. I think that it was a really good, rounded thing, that the very thing that Red Skull sought to control was the thing that ended up being his undoing. So I think that's pretty cool.
All right. So then we get VE Day, 1945. And while everyone is celebrating, you see not everybody is. The Howling Commandos are taking a toast to Rogers in a bar full of people celebrating, as well as the SSR, the Strategic Scientific Reserve, is now closing up shop, and Phillips gives the Captain America file to Peggy, and instead of seeing the muscular Steve picture, you see the skinny kid from Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And you essentially learn that at this point it is beyond any doubt that Peggy was in love with Steve. Even before he had the serum, she was starting to take a liking to him.
Yeah.
And so then we get him waking up, and Amanda Rigetti from The Mentalist is all dolled up to look like she's from 1945, except that he's listening to a baseball game that he was at in 1941. So yeah, it's like he doesn't fall for it. And so then the two SHIELD agents come in, and he ends up throwing him through a wall, and we get to the ending scene where he runs out into a greater Manhattan. And it's like, holy shit. And he gets the ice broken to him. You've been asleep, Cap, for almost 70 years. The third 70. And he's like, you going to be okay? Yeah, I had a date. And we then get him in the post-credit scene where this is actually a scene from the Avengers, where he's beating on the punching bags in a boxing
Gym.
Yep, in a gym.
Mm-hmm.
and he punches out the whole bag. So it's like, oh shit. But we'll actually cover that scene when we get to Avengers next week. So let's cover the VE Day and him waking up. So what did you all think? We'll start with Riot.
Well, I remember this review that I watched, where it's just like, well, we all knew he was coming back for the Avengers, but Peggy didn't. So it's just kind of, heartbreaking because, it's just like she basically listened to the last moments of the guy she loved on the Conlink. So it's just obviously, even though it's a happy day, she's still sad. So, and she knows like his sacrifice and whatever. So yeah, and then it's like it's not just, and it wasn't like she loved him just because of the muscles. So obviously, because of the skinny Steve picture and whatever. So yeah, I thought it was just a very touching, moving thing on that. And then obviously waking up, they gotta try and ease him into this a little bit because imagine stream whiplash, it's just you wake up and it's several years later, let alone 70 years later. It's how does someone even begin to process that? So obviously making a room look just oh, old-timey stuff or whatever. I get the intention, but not very good disguised as Steve. And then he just runs out. He's like, oh my god! And it's just kind of the cinematography there, where it's just spinning around, where it's just kind of he's just taking it all in. It's there's skyscrapers now, bunch of electronic billboards, a bunch of people walking around with different dress and stuff like that, and it's just kind of crazy. And then obviously we get to see Nick Fury again, wanting to recruit him, kind of in the Iron Man, and then the obviously from the Incredible Hulk too, although that kind of thing. So kind of just tying everything together. So yeah, I like that.
All right, Ambassador.
Yeah, it's a very melancholy, down key scene because now Steve is a man out of time. Literally, he's outlived all of his, well, practically everyone that he ever knew, except for Peggy, but she's in her old age now. And there's actually the one thing I wish they had done, although I understand why they didn't. There's actually an alternate scene or a deleted scene for the ending where Steve escapes from the Shield compound there in Manhattan.
Yep, it's extended.
Yeah, and Fury's like, you might know it as the SSR, Strategic Scientific Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
It's now Shield, and he's like, this has happened, and he's like, well, did we win? He's like, yeah. He's like, because of you, taking out Hydra was a big part of that. I wish they had kept all that in. I really do, because I think it would have been a nice bridge back to what we had just gone through or anything. But the gut punching line, he's like, I had a date, and now I'm too late for it. By decades. 7 decades. History has happened.
All right.
So those are my thoughts.
Jacob.
I thought it was a good ending. It was, it's part of me wished that the Avengers had found him, because that happens in obviously I know it couldn't be that way because the Avengers is in the next movie and all, yada yada yada. But part of me that wishes that had happened, because that's what happens in the comic books, is Hulk had quit the Avengers, and so it was just Iron Man, Thor, Wasp, and Ant-Man, and they stumble on Captain America in in the middle of the Arctic. But I know that couldn't be the case here. But that was just a part. The child in me wanted that to see that happen. But I do think it's really good. It's shows the as pointed out, the cinematography with the spinning. It shows the emotional toll that is about to happen to Steve Rogers as he wakes up and being a man out of time. I think that showing that, seeing that, and putting that on display really get an effect for how he is going to be Captain America going forward in sort of this new world.
Alrighty, so now we will get to scoring the film. Me, I will give it a objectively an 8.5 out of 10. You got some great moments. You got a couple moments that don't feel like they really needed to be in the film. However, this film is always solid, enjoyable to watch. Subjectively, it's a 9.5 out of 10. Truly enjoyed. And moviegoer, it is a 10 out of 10. So I'll now go around the room and Riot Kitty, what's your score for it?
My score for it, I'm gonna say 9 out of 10. Very good movie. Like you said, some moments it kind of didn't need to be in it, but you know what? It's a very solid film. You know, it builds the foundation for, you know, movies to come. It does all of that really well while being a very strong standalone piece as well. Outside of, you know, it being a part of the cinematic universe and whatnot. So it's a great return, a long drawn out return for Captain America in the movie theaters. So
All right. Jake.
I'll give it a solid 8 out of 10. I think that it does have a couple of hang-ups, a couple of logic problems in the film, but I still enjoy it. I think it's an amazing film. I think that Chris Evans was great. I will admit I was hesitant after seeing him in Captain America, or seeing him as Johnny Storm in Fantastic Four. So I was a little hesitant to see him as Captain America, but it just goes to show you that the director can do wonders with an actor, no matter what their previous filmography was. And Chris Evans definitely pulled it off. He's the best Captain America as far as live action films. And, you know, I really wish they would bring Johnson back to direct another Marvel film. I don't know if that'll ever happen. Although, you know, maybe with James Gunn trying to get the old band back together for his DCU vision, maybe we'll get to see him direct a DC film. But I really think he should have been brought back at some point to direct a film, maybe not necessarily Winter Soldier, but whatever the case may be. I think that he was underused and they should have used him again. So,
Ambassador.
My score, it's a 10 out of 10 for numerous reasons. I know there are issues with it, but for me, it's still at 10 out of 10 because I love war movies, I love comic book movies, and I love period movies, and this is all three. And it does all three very, very well. I mean, yeah, it does tie into the broader MCU, but it is just on its own merits as its own individual movie. It stands on those three pillars and it stands on them very well. Chris Evans, I mean, I will say this. He was one of the 2 or 3 bright spots in the Fantastic Four films, and I enjoyed him immensely in this. When I heard that he was going to be playing Cap, I was like, the Human Torch? I'll give him a shot because I actually liked him as the Human Torch. It isn't the acting in those movies, this quick side note, that bothered me. It was the overall story and the overall narrative that bothered me with the Fantastic Four films. Not to mention that Galactus was a cloud. Galactus
Honestly,
is not a cloud!
and Doctor Doom was a pretty boy. That drove me absolutely nuts.
That didn't bother me as much, but I know we're running alongside. I don't want to get off on a big tangent, but all I will say is I stand by my score, and Galactus is not a cloud. There. No more need be said.
Honestly, like the Fantastic Four movies, like I kind of find them adorable. If that makes any sense. I think they're very cute movies. You know, it's just like obviously Galactus is not a cloud, so it's like
Galactus is not a cloud.
But you know what? In comparison to like the 2015 reboot, Doom is immensely better in this movie.
Yes, Gillian McMahon as Victor Von Doom. He was good. I'm waiting to see who they cast now that they have potentially cast Reed Richards.
Alrighty, so that
Anyway,
is
sorry.
It's all right. That is going to end tonight's stream, folks. Thank you to CS and Pierre for joining earlier. They had to skedaddle early. Next week is not going to be MCU Sunday. I will amend the scheduling because next Sunday is Mother's Day. Mothers are important, so spend your time with your mamas.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much to the panel for coming on in. And the next one will be the week after next, where we discuss the assembly or the Avengers Assemble of the first Avengers.
Avengers, assemble.
Nope. That doesn't
Some
come until
assembly
in game.
required. Yep.
Yes, some assembly required. That was the big tagline. Some assembly required.
Yep.
You can't get much
And
better marketing than that.
tomorrow I may do my mystery review if I'm not in pain tomorrow. I will do my mystery
I hope you
review in
feel
the
better,
afternoon.
Orange. I hope you feel better.
I mean, I've been taking pain pills like candy for the last couple hours, and it's not helping. So
You need to go lay down.
that's basically what I'm going to be doing.
Okay, let's wrap this up so you can go lay down.
Yep. Thank you to everybody all in the chat. I usually go through the names, but pain right now is too much. So
Everybody in the chat, thank you for being here. You all are
Yes.
Thank
awesome.
you,
We
Chad,
love you.
for being here.
This
We've
chat
been having-
rocks. Thank you, everyone.
you all
Yes.
do freaking rock, and you all have a wonderful night. God bless and stay humble.
Bye.